Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today I am excited to share somebody that is fascinating to me. His name's Wade Lightheart. He is co-founder of BioOptimizers, a company that makes some amazing supplements, which we will have an opportunity to share with you, and I'm excited to share them. I think most of you know I'm pretty particular about any kind of supplements or products that I get behind, and I won't use them until I've tested them and given them to clients and friends and family members to test and get some feedback on. But I actually happened to be listening to a podcast by Dave Asprey, and Wade and his partner were on there, and one of my students and clients texted me one day with the link to it and said, "You really should listen to this. I think you'll enjoy it. These are some cool guys." And most of my students that are kind of in my closer inner circle don't send me stuff because they know I'm busy unless they think I would really enjoy it. And so I listened to this interview with Wade and his partner, and I found it quite fascinating. And I had questions, and my urge was, I got to track this guy down. So I did a little web search. And the other thing is, when Wade spoke, he didn't speak as much as his partner, but when he spoke, something inside of me had this very sense of depth and truth and presence, and maybe not so many words per se, but kind of like my wife. She doesn't talk a lot, but when she talks, it's a good idea to listen, you know? And so I tracked Wade down, and one thing turned out, connection, and then we realized we were both going to be at CanFit Pro. So when I went to CanFit Pro, Wade and I texted each other and met at the trade show. And when I met Wade, it was a beautiful experience. I saw in his physical presence that it completely mirrored what I experienced internally when I heard him on the podcast. And as you'll see when you listen to him talk, he's got a beautiful, harmonious voice. And we both turned out to have a lot of beautiful harmony in our interests and our values and our concern for life and people and why we do what we do. So I've been very excited to get Wade here to the Heaven House to lift rocks and share smoke and just share my personal space and, you know, water chargers and all sorts of neat stuff which we've been getting into this morning. So I'm really excited to share Wade Lightheart with you guys and his products and the journey we're about to take you on. And I hope you enjoy the journey as much as I enjoy hanging out with Wade. So Wade, welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek.
Thank you so much. It's a real treat to be here. So thank you for having me in your home.
And, you know, Wade, one of the things that I found fascinating about you is that you are a vegetarian bodybuilder, and you still are a vegetarian. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're just releasing a 6-part series called The Honest Vegetarian that I did with my senior instructor, Matt Weldon, who's a very sharp guy, and we go into every aspect of it, and I've studied this stuff extensively for a long time because I've had countless vegetarian patients that were unhealthy and needed rehabilitation and, you know, the things that happen when we're eating the wrong diet, regardless of what we're eating. Mm-hmm. And but when I heard that you were a vegetarian bodybuilder, I went and Googled and looked you up, and I thought, holy shit, this guy really does have some muscle on him. So one of my first kind of curiosities is, okay, well, how does he do that? Because I've worked with a lot of vegetarian athletes, and one of the biggest challenges they have, if they're not come from a region in the world where vegetarianism is natural to them, is keeping muscle mass on. And when I was a vegetarian, no matter how hard I trained, I could not put on muscle mass, and in fact, I lost about 25 pounds in the year that I was training while I was still training hard, and I found that I needed more recovery between workouts, and, you know, I used every trick that I could from, you know, varieties of protein source, plant source proteins, and I wasn't using dairy or anything. It was a strictly vegetarian approach. But when I was talking to you and just when I saw those pictures, I thought, man, it would be fun to talk to you and sort of see what, just some of what some of your viewpoints are and what some of the techniques that you used to maintain and develop so much muscle mass because you're definitely a well-built guy, no matter whether you're eating meat or anything, and you still are, which is lovely. And in fact, for those of you that can't see Wade, Wade looks to me like a young Bill Pearl, and it's kind of cool because Bill Pearl, is probably the most famous vegetarian bodybuilder ever, and I've met Bill Pearl, and so our story today is going to be fun, and it's going to go down a variety of different trails, I would call them, mystical trails, practical trails, logical trails, investigative journeys. But before we get into all that, I would love for you to share a bit about your history and what makes you Wade Lightheart and what ultimately led to you being a competitive vegetarian bodybuilder, and from there, what ultimately was the formative forces behind the creation of your company. And then once we get there, I'd love to talk about each of the products, because I've tested, I think, pretty much everything that you've sent me. And, us having this conversation is my testimonial, because I would certainly do this with you as a person, but if I didn't like the products, I would leave that out of it. But I'm not, because I've really enjoyed the products, and I've got nothing but fantastic feedback from people that are usually very critical too, and have a lot of experience, and people that I've trained to work with their soul to find out whether or not something's worth eating or using, and got really good feedback. So please take us on a journey into Wade Lightheart, because I've found my time with you absolutely fascinating.
Thanks. Where to begin? I guess I'll try and be as brief as possible. And
well, let it flow.
So, I was a kid in Canada, grew up in a very rural environment. And for those who haven't known that, I got into some life-changing events happened at 15. I just kind of grew up as an ordinary kid in a blue-collar family, and playing hockey as all Canadian kids do.
Yeah.
And when I was 15, life kind of happens, you can't control, it's how you control how you respond to life. But my parents moved to a very rural area. We talked about that earlier. It was 5 miles to my nearest neighbor at this beautiful private resort that my parents were the caretakers of. And I wasn't too happy about moving there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Being 15, taken away from my friends, taken away from my hockey career in a lot of ways. I didn't have the same, it was 55 miles to the nearest city where there was hockey and things like that. And at that time, so we moved there. The second thing that happened is my sister, who was 4 years my senior, she was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, yeah.
So she began chemotherapy treatment and that sort of stuff. We didn't know anything about any alternative methodologies. That was just the way you go. And so that started to happen. So I started to get tuned into the medical industry, or exposed to the challenges and tribulations that sometimes presents with somebody with cancer, especially at a young age, which is very difficult on the family. It's very difficult. It's a very perception shifter.
Yeah.
Especially when you're that young, because you think you're going to live forever. You think you know everything. You think everything's all figured out. And here is this life-jarring experience, and everybody's kind of in denial about it, except maybe my sister.
Yeah.
So that happened. And then also she gave me a bodybuilding book, or a magazine. It was a muscle and fitness magazine. It had Troy Zuclato on the cover, who was a blonde guy. He had just won Mr. California. He had these huge muscles and two pretty girls on the cover. And, being 15 and driven mad with testosterone, and it's like, I'm wanting to, try and interact with these wonderful beings called females.
Yes.
And not knowing anything about that. Not that I really know anything anyways. What I find is you just dive deeper into the mystery, which is fascinating. I said, wow, maybe if I get these muscles, that might help. So I bought into the Joe Weider lie. Way to go, marketing team. They did a great job. So I had no gym. So I determined that, I would construct a gym in my barn. I read Education of a Bodybuilder by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then got his encyclopedia of bodybuilding. And he had trained a little bit in his basement and stuff. And I said, I can build a gym in my garage. And we had a big barn. And And I would go out there and it was very crude, kind of like the Rocky versus Drago movie where I had sawhorses and I put a pulley system that I built and had a barbell that I have to put these old York cement plates.
Yes, I had those.
I bought a set. I had worked that summer lifting rocks and clearing land.
Yep.
And bought all that stuff. And my dad was a very handy fella. And I was clear that I did not want him to help me assemble my weight training set. I had a little barbell bench press with some leg extension and stuff, and I started constructing this and had a two-wheeler under a tractor tire and pull up on a beam. And I built a pulley system, but the pipe was it was kind of funny because you have to slide these on a pipe and just a single pulley, so you had to pull it under extreme control or the thing would smack you in the head. So you had to learn
control.
Had to learn control of the movement, or it was I'd get smacked in the head or something. So
a Zen teacher.
It was kind of like very very rural, very crude, but I had to develop an intuitive sense of what I was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I started connecting with me myself, and that was the beginning of my journey. And I started reading that, and I resonated with Arnold's story from the standpoint that he was from a area where bodybuilding was weird and he had a strange name, and but he said if you were able to do hard work, a positive attitude and self-discipline, you could achieve anything.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard any message like that and I really resonated. Of course, he was in the movies and he was in, all that sort of attractive component. So I engaged in lifts. So my first 4 years was training in the barn. I'd go out there in a snowsuit. Sometimes my hands would freeze to the bar, and I just all thought that was a badge of honor or badge. And people thought I was crazy. And for anyone listening, if they have a passion, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it's weight training or painting or reading or whatever it happens to be, just pursue it. And whatever obstacle or local obstacles that you have, that as Nietzsche would say, would make you stronger.
Yeah.
And so it was actually the perfect environment for me to kind of connect with myself and to develop more an intuitive pathway. This was before the internet and all that sort of stuff. So I went through 4 years, and I went to university, exercise physiology, and I started out in computers, as I told you before. My sister died in my first semester, and at that point, that was a jarring effect because we had a lot of conversations about death and dying and what that was like, and that had a very positive impact on me, as tragic as the situation was. And I realized that I needed to pursue my pathway, which was into physicality, and working out and training, and how does this body create life? And the other thing I made a vow to myself was that I would not go through life without taking chances and trying things or following. And I think that contrarian type of mentality, I guess that was probably part of my psychology. It was an expression of that, a physical expression of that. And I just continued on pursuing that after university. And university gave me a little bit of a background, but it was like incomplete information. It was a bunch of knowledge. It was a bunch of pieces of information, but it wasn't integrated.
Yeah.
So I started learning. I started studying under people who were producing extraordinary results in the world.
Yeah, good.
And that began my journey there. And then I pursued that for a number of years. Competing, I had a terrible genetics. I had no business being in a bodybuilding contest, but I had a lot of determination and will. I was always like that. Even when I played sports, I would just train harder or longer and that sort of stuff. It was kind of natural to me. And so years later that, it took me about, 10 years to go to my first national championships. And what I came out of that first national championship was about 1998, as I realized at the time Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates were kind of the dominant entities on the scene. I was like, I'd have to take an awful lot of drugs to be on stage with these guys. And realistically, I don't think we're playing with the same level of genetics here. I think like the end is kind of right in it. But at that time I moved to the West Coast and started coaching people. I won some provincial championships and got a little bit of notoriety and started a personal training business and a juice bar in Vancouver. Lived like a wild man for a while, got into partying and everything and, just off the turnip truck in the big city, so to speak.
Yeah. Everything's wild now.
And you think you can just do anything.
Yeah.
And did about a year of that and found out, well, there's limitations to that. Had a profound life-changing experience I had experimented with meditation and super learning and sounds and Baroque music, and then changing that into speeding up the rhythm to speed up brain waves, and got into all that stuff, and had a life-changing experience where a spiritual teacher came to me and told me I needed to kind of straighten out my life and go down a more meditative path. And so I did that. And after about a year, I guess it was about 6 months, maybe a year in, I read The Holy Science by Swami Sri Yukteswar.
Yeah, Sri Yukteswar.
I was like, well, that's an interesting book. And he had said, he had an argument about digestive and the nervous system and drawing to different vegetarian stuff. And I was like, well, that's pretty radical. Maybe I'll give that a try for a couple of weeks. So I was a vegetarian for 2 weeks. I said, well, I didn't dry up and blow away. I'll try 2 weeks more. I did a month, and I was like, okay, a month's okay. I said, well, I'll do another month. So I did another month. It was 2 months. I said, well, I guess I just won't eat meat anymore, and I haven't since.
Wow.
So I'm not like a vegan vigilante, or I'm not into isms, or I'm not saying that that's right for everybody. But for me, it was just an experiment, and I continue to challenge that. You know, I don't like to think. A lot of people like to brand me as a vegetarianism or promoting vegetarianism, and that's not it. It was just something that resonated with me, and I wanted to experiment with. Now, there are some serious challenges to it, and that kind of led me into that. And of course, my business partner, a few years, I got back into the sport and said, well, can I really be successful as a vegetarian? No one can do it. And so I started competing and training and trying to apply a meat eating mentality to a vegetarian lifestyle, and got myself to the Mr. Universe contest.
Wow, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah, no drugs on a vegetarian.
That's pretty wild, really.
Yeah, and my coach at the time was Scott Abel. He's a famous bodybuilding coach in Canada, very bright guy, and was the foundation of a lot of my training science. And went to the universe. Of course, I didn't win. I wasn't on drugs, but that wasn't the point. I knew I was not going to win that contest. It was the fulfillment of a dream I had had since I was 15.
Yeah, I mean, just to get there is amazing.
Yeah, and to be amongst the world's best.
Yeah.
And I remember standing in that lineup, and it's just like the lineup for Pumping Iron, where they're calling out the names of the country. And I'd watched that movie so many times. Yeah. And here I now was in it. So I got a firsthand experience of holding your future idea in mind relentlessly and pursuing that. So I did the Mr. Universe contest. Now, here's what I didn't know. I wasn't doing vegetarianism very well. You know, there's a lot of nuances.
There is. It's a technical path.
After that contest, I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks.
Yeah.
Just after the contest, body was blown. Yeah, stress reaction. I couldn't train for that time. My coach said, "Listen, you're messed up." And I had literally stayed on a contest diet for 9 months.
Yeah,
that was part of it.
That's
and
hardcore.
Because I had to win the Western Canadians, and I had to win the national championships, and then I had to go to the world championships.
Right.
So I couldn't go off the diet. And with Scott, he hadn't worked with a lot of vegetarians, so we were really on the edge at that point of what can we do. And I think I willed myself through it at the cost. Now, which set things up, because after I got back, I gained all this weight. I met a doctor, Dr. Michael O'Brien. He was a senior citizen. He was well up in his 70s, and he had these amazing, piercing blue eyes. He was physically extremely strong. He was extraordinarily brilliant. He was the epitome of what you would hope to be as a senior citizen.
Wow. And
I came to him and I said, it's obvious this guy could just kick my butt. Like obviously I'm doing something wrong. And I said to him, what's going on? Why did I have this challenge? And he said, Wade, you've learned to build the body from the outside in.
Yeah.
You haven't learned to build the body from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so he started teaching me about some of the fallacies that I had, that if I eat something, I'm absorbing and utilizing it, nutrifying it. And that was not the case. He taught me about mineralization and about all these different components and enzymes and probiotics. And nobody was talking about it back then.
Yeah.
Or very few people. And I started applying his process in 6 months using high levels of enzymes and probiotics. I rebuilt my physique, rebuilt my health.
Wow.
Felt great. Did a lot of experiments on the performance side. At that time, Matt, my business partner, and I, we had started a bodybuilding company. We had a course called Freaky Big Naturally.
That's cool.
And we were just teaching people, because I realized that if a person followed the same pathway that I had followed in bodybuilding, they were going to invariably lead to a physical breakdown of some sort.
Right.
So I took it to the edge, and I realized, okay, I got to learn something here, because I got people following me, people, engaging and entrusting me as a teacher for them. I need to know what's happening. So over the next 4 years, I did experiments with we coached about 15,000 people through the internet. At that time, boards and people getting, it was the old school of the internet. And we were talking about mind machines, and we were talking about cold therapy, and we were doing all these kind of far out things at the time in the bodybuilding world. And that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And Matt, being a great marketer, and knew how to package it and present it, and really coach me through that process, because I didn't know anything about that sort of stuff. I was just being me, and kind of like I am today. He's the strategist and the mind behind the machine, if you will. And I learned a lot. And then from that, we realized the biggest problem with vegetarianism or with any kind of training is when you eat whatever you eat, people kind of assume it's a single canal from your mouth to your anus.
Yeah.
And the food is not inside your cells. It's inside that canal.
Which technically is not inside your body.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We just kind of assume.
We do.
And that assumption will cost you your life. That will cost you your health. And so there is a process that goes on to bring people through that, from tasting, touching, feeling the food, sensing the food, smelling the food, taking in the sensories, like you would talk about in Ayurvedic medicine. Mm-hmm. And then the process of the food, masticating the food, letting it go down to the body, the hydrochloric acid working onto it, and then transiting into the intestinal tract. And I realized that I had compromised that using the process following the standard bodybuilding diet.
Right, yeah.
And so I had to rebuild it, and I did it for myself, and I did it for my students. And then after about 4 years, I said, well, let me apply this again. And so I took everything I knew or had learned and applied it. Got ready for a national championship in 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
Which was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Won both my classes, went to the world championships again 3 months later.
Neat.
Got 5th in the world at that one, which was great.
That's
it was way
fantastic.
better, especially considering, from 10 to 3, I could have been 10th, I could have been 3rd. We were all really the same. Now 1 and 2 were in a different caliber.
Yeah.
I was very clear at that point. That was where my physical limits were. Mm-hmm. Bow to those fellows. I didn't feel any animosity about losing the contest. It was an experience of getting my own potential.
Yes.
And that's the real spirit of competition. Your competition can leverage the ego to get you to push your best, because you've got a deadline, you've got a set of standards, you got it's your test. Your test is how you show up on stage, and there's no comebacks in bodybuilding. It's the work before you show up. You're either there or you're not, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I knew that what I had was something, and we started taking it around the world, and wrote some books and did that. And after about maybe 5, probably 6 or 7. That would be in 2007. So we went through that for about 5 years, and I realized that it kind of transcended the bodybuilding world. I still love to lift, and I love the experience, and I love building up my body from the inside out. But I recognized that the thing that we had to do in order to get my vegetarian pathway really optimized was to develop all these digestive components to optimize our digestion, because most people's digestion is dysfunctional to some degree, if you score on a scale of 1 to 10. Yeah. And so we changed our company, because I said, what do we do really well? And I said, we fix digestion really well, because there was only a fraction of our students that were vegetarians like myself. Most weren't, and I don't suggest that they should be. Yeah. But I do suggest that, hey, you need to optimize your digestive health in order to optimize.
Especially if you're going to be a vegetarian.
It's essential. It's essential. It really is. And so we started doing that about 5-6 years ago, and really focusing on helping people overcome the digestive challenges that we are now experiencing culturally, because what we've done as far as farming, food production, the food production and the food distribution system, which has altered what I would say what is natural and innate for our dietary habits, whatever your dietary practice is supposed, is optimal for you.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing that, and Matt and I made a pact with ourselves that we would never compromise what we do as far as development of our products. That we'd be an education company first and foremost, because you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet.
No.
You can't supplement yourself out of a bad lifestyle.
No.
Those are foundational principles, but there are things that you can do to augment, especially if you're compromised or you're having challenges in that area. And we've done that, and we've focused on that as our primary source. And we are also now entering into brain optimization, because we start with the brain below, and then you go to the brain above, and then you start going to these other areas, and that's where we are today as a company, and what we're doing, and what we're passionate about.
That's exciting. What came to me as you were talking is you can't supplement yourself out of a bad relationship with yourself.
Correct.
And unfortunately, a lot of bodybuilding and combative sports are compensations for the fear generated for a variety of reasons, from childhood programming to religious beliefs to you name it. But a lot of people's motive is to try to conquer some sort of invisible demon. And so they're driven to do things and take shortcuts and try to conquer this invisible shadow that they have, that they're trying to succumb through athletic training or even education, getting more and more degrees and trying to, achieve some sort of predetermined status of, okay, I'm smart now, I'm okay in the world or whatever. But the side effects of that approach is that one's externalizing their awareness into what they see in the mirror and into what other people say about them. But they're departing away from what they're actually feeling and connecting with their inner voice, their heart, their soul, their authentic sense of self. So typically what you find is there's a broken child encased in a body like that, and they're trying to armor it up in order to present themselves in such a way that either gives them a sense of validity or a sense of worthiness or a sense of stature or power or success. And that ultimately, I think, takes us further and further away from listening to the innate wisdom of our cells, our body, and our inner voice, the soul or the heart. And people that keep trying to solve these kinds of issues with supplements never get very good results, because they're never really solving the issue. And they ultimately meet the pain teacher and have to go back into a deeper relationship with themselves. And sometimes it comes as a disease, as you well know.
Yeah, well said. I think Arthur Jones said it best. In summary, he commented, I think, on the bodybuilding. I think it was in Keys to the Inner Universe
by Bill Pearl.
Yeah. And there was a summary of his relationship with Arthur Jones, and I think he said little boys in gorilla suits was his summary of it. And I think that's true for a lot of people in the world, whatever their person, whether it's university degrees or whether it's money or fame or fortune or accolades, like you had said. Yeah. And I think there's a part in that drives high achievers, which is a sense of I'm not enough.
Yeah.
But I believe in that pursuit, there's merit to the point when one comes full resonance with one's soul's nature.
Yeah.
That's when you truly become, when you transcend other people's opinions or other systems or whatever, and you can step into who you are as your individual, unique, genetic, biological, spiritual sense.
Yeah.
That you become that. That's where you actually
start to live.
And can actually contribute to the world at that point, and that's the journey I think we're all on at some point. And some people that's a short journey, some people that's a lifetime journey, sometimes it's maybe more than that. One
of the sad parts about what you've just explained, which I totally agree with, is that that's what religion is really meant to do for us. It's really meant to bring us into connection with the sacred, connection with the mysterious, connection with that which we would refer to as divine, which is, the wholeness, the truth, the beauty, the good, the creativity, the spirit, the dance, and the magic. But, like so many things that get corporatized, it becomes a system that profits on people's pain and profits on people's confusion. And that is also part of the game. Jung says all religious systems are designed to protect you from the direct experience of God. Mm-hmm. And, the direct experience of God is complete annihilation of the ego. So religious systems create fields of polarity that act in much the same way that weight sets do in gyms. Mm-hmm. And so I call that spirit gym. We enter into the world and we learn that there's an emotional gym, there's a mental gym, and all of which is experienced through a physical body, but there's also spirit gym, which is the container of all aspects of unconditional love manifesting itself, awareness through consciousness, which you cannot have without polarity. So, I like Edward Edinger, a famous psychiatrist and Jungian analyst, says consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. So though we guys like me and people may fantasize about what religion should be or could be, when you look at it more deeply, you realize that consciousness has set up fields of resistance within itself, and we meet these fields of resistance. We go to school, we get degrees, and we find out that the world just doesn't work like they said it would in school. Mm-hmm. You get a master's degree in something, and you go out and you meet some farm boy who knows a lot more than you, and you're like, what the hell's going on here? And you go to school, or you go to work for some corporation, maybe where you have the latitude to create and invent, and you find that in order to really do the work you need to do, you have to go beyond what they taught you in school. And paradoxically, a lot of things that they taught you were true turn out not to be true, at least in certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. But if you aren't brave enough to go outside the confines of the box of education, which is why Mark Twain beautifully says, never let your schooling get in the way of your education. But once we start finding our way through the ropes and realizing at some point that the pain is really a tool of guidance that's there to enhance our awareness so that we make better choices and we learn to listen to our heart as much as we listen to our head, then, as I know you know from your own life, you reach a point where you realize all the painful experiences, the losses of jobs, the divorces, the arguments, the fights, why did I do that? Why did I go to that school, take that course? Why was I married to that person? Why did I fail in that business partnership? And all of a sudden, it's like you see this golden thread tying it all together, and you realize to be the person you are at that moment, you needed each level of training that was offered to you in those experiences, without which you could never really have authentic wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's sort of one of the beautiful things I love about your journey, is that it's, when I listen to you talk, I don't hear someone selling supplements. I don't hear sort of a corporate story. My favorite definition of marketing is that effective marketing is telling the truth attractively. Mm. And I love, because whenever I've talked to you, I've heard you telling the truth about how you develop the opinions you have, but without saying other people are wrong or bad. Mm-hmm. I've heard you explaining your path and how you'd get to a certain point and then all of a sudden it was time for a turnaround. It was like it was a dead-end road and there was no sense going further. And so you would change directions, whether it be a different teacher or a different process or a different therapist like the doctor that mm-hmm. taught you. And so when I meet somebody that's open to guidance from life itself and learns that you have to get quiet inside to listen to the soul or to the inner voice that is silence talking, call it Great Spirit or the Holy Spirit or whatever people want to name it. I found that those people can't maintain that deep, intimate relationship with what I would call the heart's compass, while also scamming and deceiving and manipulating people for money.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was listening to you on the podcast with Dave Asprey, I picked up that vibration. And I said, I haven't even tried this guy's supplements, and I'm not one that's easily falling for, stories. And stories, they're easy to manufacture, and so are testimonials.
Mm-hmm.
But what I picked up was someone who I could trust, because just listening to you talk, I felt wisdom. I didn't feel a sales pitch. I didn't feel I need all the attention. I felt someone sharing their authentic life experience. And so then when I got to try the products and test them for myself and let my soul guide me and say, okay, how many of these do I take? When do I take them? I mean, you gave me some guidelines. You sent me a nice card, but I always check, because what's good for most people may not be good for any one of us, which is why in my Primal Pattern Eating course online, I offer that to the world as a separate course from my Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2 training, which is our introductory to professional lifestyle coaching, which is diet and lifestyle. But I cut that section out, about 8 hours of training, to give it to the public, because I really felt everybody needs to understand how to access that inner guidance system, or you just go from diet book to diet book to expert, and you feel good for a few days or a few months, and then all of a sudden hell breaks loose, and then you're off to the next diet. And I tell people that's really just doing metabolic typing very slowly. There's a way. The better way to do it is just develop an intimate relationship with yourself, find your center, and shut your head off, and learn to listen to the wisdom of your body and your genes and your soul, and above and beyond what our rational, logical mind can conjure up. Because half the time when we're making decisions based on so-called research and other people's information, we tend to accept that what they're saying is actually factual. Yet most of those people don't even understand how the studies they're citing were designed. Mm-hmm. They don't know 50% of the words in the studies, and they're just taking it because the conclusion lends support to the bias that they already have.
Right.
And so because other people are lazy and don't study and research stuff, they end up just believing it. So the other thing that our culture seems to forget is that if you look at the Tai Chi symbol, we have yin and yang, complementary opposites. But what people forget is the rational and the logical, which is yang, has to be supported by its complementary opposite, which is the unrational, the emotional, the intuitive. But our culture is so heavy into the yang expression of mind, it's dangerously lost touch with the unrational intuitive. And there's nothing about love that's rational. We all know that. And when scientists start going, oh, you talk about all this stuff like the soul, that's just a bunch of bullshit. You can't prove that in a laboratory. And I look right at them and I say, you can't prove love in a laboratory either, but do you believe in it? What would your life be like without it? Not one single one of these left-brain scientist types has ever denied that love is the most important thing in their life. And when they realize you can't weigh it and measure it and package it and put it into a quaint little article with a conclusion, it really opens the door to the fact that the thing that's really most invaluable in all of our lives is unrational and is something that we are best led intuitively. And you can't learn how to be a good lover in bed by reading books. You can only get a bunch of ideas in your head, but you still have to go into the process of connection, or you're just somebody who's reading a book while having sex. So I think the beauty of a lot of what I love about your process and about your story and your life and the way you operate is that you do have both sides of the Tai Chi symbol, and it's lovely to see someone who takes that into account, whether it be formulating supplements, choosing what he's going to eat, how he's going to live, where he's going to go, who he's going to be in a relationship with. And so I'm grateful that I get to share you with people, because it's a rare thing to find someone who's got both halves of the symbol holding hands.
Thanks. Well, we're working on it. It's a work in process.
It always is. It always is. Yeah.
So I don't want to sit here and think, oh, I've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
I learned a couple of things from some experiments gone wrong and some gone right. So, so.
Well, Tony Robbins used to be a client of mine, and I think he made a quote one time. He said, knowledge comes from making mistakes. You can't have knowledge without experience. Experience comes with making mistakes, and only through experience of knowledge and making mistakes can you produce wisdom, which is the synthesis.
I think that's you knocked on a good point, because one of the things when I studied the word education, its a root word is adduce, which means to learn from within. And so to learn from within is to actually apply the experiments of life, because there's no better laboratory than your own experience.
Right. It's the only laboratory.
Now,
at the end of the day.
Exactly. Everything is coming through that filtered bias right off the bat. And if you can accept that, then you can say, well, this is what I've found based on my experience. But in martial arts, a rigid position is always a position of weakness.
Yeah.
So I think, to summarize, because I agree a lot with what you said, is, religious or education pathways, or there is a certain component of structure that's required to get you to a point. But that's knowledge.
It is.
Wisdom is when you can step past the rigid definitions that we set ourselves up in, and kind of transcend them into taking those experiences. I think that's what life is. It's a radical experience. We don't really know where we came from. We don't know where we're going. We're spinning on some clod of dirt at some ridiculous rate, at some piece of the galaxy, which is infinite in nature, and what we can see in this room. I mean, there's nothing more fantastic than life itself. And there's certainly much more that we don't know than what we do. So one of the philosophies that Matt, what's interesting, and people talk about dogmatic beliefs. My business partner, Matt, he's on a ketogenic diet, which works for him. I'm a vegetarian. Like, we're about as polar opposites as you could get on far as philosophies around dietary practices. But what people don't understand is where we meet is, well, developing a system and a methodology that works for that particular person in their life at this moment.
Yeah.
That's where the universality is. And for us, was how do we augment that process for people who might have various challenges with various things, and developing something that they can experiment with, trust, and then removing the risk that's involved.
Yeah.
So anytime, the biggest risk that happens in any endeavor in this dimension that we live in, the Western culture, is what is the cost of that?
Yeah.
The cost of my time, the cost in my money, the cost in my resources, or getting indoctrinated with a false belief or whatever. And so we look at that philosophy, and so we always said, we're going to make the best products that we know how to make. We're going to incorporate the smartest people who are doing. We're going to use all of the best stuff, and then if somebody tries our stuff and they don't like it, well, we'll just give them their money back and remove the risk. Thank you for giving us the feedback of that experiment.
Yeah.
And in the internet world, I think that just keeps an open book, and that allows us to not only get what I call legitimate feedback, and believe me, we read the miraculous testimonials each week to our whole team online every Monday, because I'm jacked up about the little old lady who's 65 years old who suffered from IBS for 20 years.
Yeah.
When I hear that story, I get much more energized that this person's life has been transformed. I mean, Matt and I were both personal trainers. We were in the business of helping people, and we got this extension more so than I would by, we hit this number, or we had this many opt-ins, or made this many.
Yeah.
That's all cool, and it's a necessary part of business. But for me, it's that real person that was able to make a difference, and it's why we've been so education oriented. I created an awesome health course that everybody gets access to, and they come into BioOptimizers, whether they purchase the products or not.
Cool.
Which is a summary of the things that I learned in my life in a 12-week course, at 5 to 15-minute videos, and we give the references, because I didn't learn all this stuff. I didn't invent all this stuff. I didn't come up with it. I found this worked for me, or this worked for me, or this. So here's a summary. Here's the person. If this is an area you want to explore, go explore it. So it's a way of condensing things for people. And then if they want to try some of our products, that's great. And if they don't, maybe they'll find something else or whatever they need through that course to take the next step on their journey.
Yeah, well, like you said, you're an education company too, so they have tried your product.
Yeah.
Meaning they got the educational arm of it. You know, one of the thoughts that came to me while you were talking there is the most dangerous thing we can do to ourselves is keep doing something repeatedly when it hasn't been working repeatedly.
It's so pervasive in training philosophies, dietary philosophies, like almost any discipline that you see out there.
Or ism.
Ism, that's it. As soon as it becomes an ism, it loses it because it then becomes dogmatic opposed to a series of principles.
It becomes a belief system, and a belief system is, by definition, closed, right? If you, how do you describe a belief system if it's open, right? You know, you can say I'm driving my car because you close the doors and you're in the car and you're driving it, but if your car has no doors and no windows and anybody can put their key in it, it's hard to say it's yours because anybody can take it. And so, you know, you can always tell when there's a belief system at play because there's something being defended.
Yeah.
And the problem with belief systems, as soon as they start defending themselves, one of the defenses that's programmed into believers is not to look at any opposing beliefs.
Correct.
And because if you do, you risk being infected.
Very well.
So you know this is right in the science of brainwashing. These are called defense memes. So you know if you aren't a Christian, you'll burn in hell, and everybody else is an
infidel.
There's something wrong with them.
Right.
And so there's the defense structure. The offense structure is if you follow the rules and be a good boy or girl, then you get to go to heaven and everything will be perfect. But the business strategy is very good because you don't get your reward until you're dead.
You're a lifelong customer.
Yeah, and in the meantime, trying to stick to the rules is going to be very tricky, cause you a lot of stress, and you're going to end up, seeing a lot of doctors, a lot of therapists, buying a lot of pills, and maybe end up on various drugs, and all that keeps you needing the support of the church and the invisible helping hand of God, and so the hat keeps going around, and the same can be seen in many systems, training systems, diet systems.
The medical system, for example, is very much like a religious practice. You have the people wearing the special coats and the special ceremonies and these all these things. And I'm not here to throw it under the bus, but again, it has its advantages and it has its limitations.
And science is right in that boat too. All you got to do is look into the opposing beliefs on the interpretation of almost any aspect of quantum physics. Can quantum processes be applied to macro objects? Some say absolutely. They're made of the micro. The principle applies. What applies to an atom applies to a collection of them, regardless of how big it is. And some say no, it absolutely doesn't. You go to classical Newtonian physics once you get past the atomic structure. You look at theories on gravity. I mean, there's as much religious sort of sectarianism and dogmatic beliefs and infighting in science as there is in religion. But the funny thing is the scientists all think they're free of all that religious stuff.
Yeah, the irony struck me when I was in university. I was actually writing my first paper in nutrition. And I was actually looking at how the carnitine shuttle works with the mitochondria and carries fats in, and the production of acetyl coenzyme, which stops carbohydrate metabolism, and then in comes the transporters, and you can now burn MCT oils, and that was fascinating. But when I went to the library, those days couldn't search on the internet. You had to go to the library, and I'd go to the library, and I had to find some supporting evidence for my work. And I remember doing my research, and I was like, well, I can find research supporting this, and I can find research that's condemning this.
Yes.
And then I said, well, so then I remember doing that and being confused. And of course, I selected the papers that supported mine, and then I had to write the next paper. I forget what the vitamin was. And I found positive effects and then no noticeable effects. And then and this pattern started to emerge throughout my university career. And I was like, wait a minute. There doesn't seem to be any truth. And that's when I left university, because I realized this is an institution of knowledge. It's not an institution of wisdom.
Right.
So in order to find wisdom, I need to find mentors.
Yes.
I need to find someone that is producing a definitive result that I would like to produce for myself.
Yes.
And I need to follow that guidance, which is traditionally how humans have existed. There was the master and the student.
Yes.
Whether you wanted to be a blacksmith, whether you wanted to farm, it might have been your dad or your mom that was teaching you that practice. It might have been a master in the local community that you were kind of had an earmark for. So somehow there's an innate natural part of the human condition that I think gravitates towards that.
Yeah.
However, traditionally that was a relatively intimate relationship where that teacher would be versed enough that they could see your psychology, they could see your biases, they could see your patterns, your physiology, your uniqueness, and then kind of alter the teaching so you could apply wisdom as it applied to you at that particular point in time. Yet they might have another student that they would take down another pathway because they understood those patterns within that person. And then, of course, nowadays on the internet, you might give a lecture to someone and on a very specific item, and they're going to say, well, Paul Chek says this about this. And you're going, whoa. That was in a lecture where there was a context of a person with this particular condition.
Yeah.
But that is the exact opposite thing. And that's the thing about mastery. Mm-hmm. You know, mastery is not limited by any given situation. It is able to adjust within the parameters of that, where that student is at that moment.
Yeah.
And later on, with someone else, it looks on the surface completely opposite.
Yes.
But it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It is the right thing at the right time for that particular individual. And I do believe the vision of mastery that I strive to achieve to is to be able to know what is the right thing at the right moment, at the right time.
Yes.
And that is a combination of practice and intuition, and that balance between the two.
Yes.
And there's mistakes are part of the experience, and you know, aha moments, eureka moments are also part of that.
Yeah, you know, the thing too is if we look at what we typically call mistakes or failures as learning opportunities. I remember seeing a quote by Richard Feynman. He said, you know, when I was in school and I got bad grades or did something wrong, I thought I had failed. But when I became a scientist, I learned that I was actually learning.
This is, I think, part of what leads to people with that emptiness inside themselves is you get inside the education system and you're instantly graded on that experience from someone else. And all of a sudden, this contributes to when you're a child outside of school, there's no sense of I'm not worthy or I'm just playing and I'm experiencing, I'm digging in the dirt, I'm smelling the flowers. You are interacting. Then you get put in the system and all of a sudden your experience is now graded.
Yes.
And so instantly you start to develop a sense of worth. Either I'm doing exactly what they told me, therefore I'm good, or I'm doing not what's good because I've been graded as an F or a D or whatever. I'm a C, I'm ordinary, I'm average, I'm only okay. And that hangover carries through people throughout life.
Yeah.
And it really handicaps them to the genius that lies within them or their own innate capacities that might not have fit within that system.
The other thing, too, along exactly with what you've said, is you get someone like me who's much more of a right brain, how does it all connect together? You know, like I don't just want to know how cortisol functions in a specific pathway. I want to know, well, what happens when the adrenal cortical pathway or the adrenaline cortisol cascade triggers? What does that do to insulin? What does that do to estrogen? What does that do to every other part of the body? You know, how does the whole thing respond? But the point that I'm getting at is that a lot of us are so much more in touch with our authentic self when we're children, and we have our own experiences that we're then told are wrong when we go to school. And in order to survive the environment, we have to sort of take on the dogma. But to the degree that we do, we actually begin to question, can we trust the little person, the child, the explorer, the person in touch with their experience anymore? Because it seems like in school, when you share the truth for you, you just get shut down. I mean, I used to get shut down anytime I would ask questions about God or any of these kinds of things, and many other things. But fortunately for me, I never lost touch with the truth of my own experiences. But I watch a lot of people getting educated right into not trusting their own experience, to the point that they no longer live inside their inner experience. They live in the database that they have in their head, which is kind of like turning your brain into a laptop computer and believing whatever's in there because some professor says it's so. And so it leads us into conforming and fitting in, which is the opposite of the hero's journey. But when we're kids, we're so ready to go on the hero's journey. You know, we don't want to go where everybody else goes. We want to go where no one's gone. We want to go find our own path through the woods. We want to go play cowboys and Indians with the bears and the wolves, even though mommy and daddy say it's dangerous out there. Like, well, that's what makes it fun, you know. And the next thing you know, there's all these fences everywhere. And where we end up is you get situations like Jamie Oliver shows. He surveys children and he shows them common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals and large audiences of school kids, and says, who can tell me what this is? Carrot. Who can tell me what this is? Sheep. And then he uses corporate logos, and he basically then calculates what percentage of children, how many of the corporate logos did they get right, and how many of the common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals did he get right? He found 50% of children in elementary schools do not recognize common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals. But on average, 100% of the corporate symbols are immediately identified by children. So what you see is that those corporate symbols are the people that are setting up the structure of the do's and the don't do's, and controlling the flow of what you believe is true or not true, or what is of value or not of value. But we get so far from the truth of eating real food and what an animal is and where our food comes from, that we actually lose our connection to the wholeness of life and to the mystery and the magic of life. And, you know, living on a farm and seeing birth and death and castration and flash flooding and lightning storms and things not working out the way you planned, and having to figure shit out that science doesn't often have an answer to, and you need to know right now. You don't have time to go phone anybody or do anything. You've got to get on the spot and get busy, and there is nobody there to rescue you. There is no professor to call. But the next thing you know, we're highly educated people with advanced degrees that sit there and freeze in the metaphorical farming situation where there's no answer. And many of my students have come to me, countless of them, and said, Paul, what do I do when I look up, this approach to low back pain, or this approach to diet, or this approach to supplementation, and I find 25 experts, all of equally credible, that say this is the way to go, and then I also find 25 experts on the completely diametric opposite viewpoint, equally qualified. They say I'm paralyzed. I don't know who to believe anymore. I say celebrate, because according to Rudolf Steiner's teachings, you've just given birth to the awareness soul. And the awareness soul emerges when you begin to question your own beliefs and the information put in front of you to find out what's authentically true for you. And I say, so the question is, now that you know that the answer to everything is checkmate, what is it that works for you? What is it that you need? Just because a lot of people don't do well with a vegetarian diet obviously doesn't mean that it's wrong for everybody. And just because a lot of people are sick from eating too much meat doesn't mean you shouldn't eat meat. So we in Steiner's model, we start off with a mineral soul, then we have a biological soul, which is our our autonomic control systems in our physical cells. Then we develop an intellectual soul, which in modern parlance is called an ego. Then we develop an awareness soul, and the awareness soul emerges when you begin to honestly question the ideas that have been programmed into your ideaplex, called an ego, and what other experts tell you is true. From there, in Steiner's model, we develop a creativity soul. We say, okay, well, not only can I figure things out for myself, but I can even go beyond that. I can get creative and help other people figure things out and give them novel solutions and teach them techniques for finding the truth. And then from there, we go to the intuitive soul, where we learn to get very still and realize that the answers to every question are inherently available to us, because the question is half the answer. If you have the question, it's like wondering what an animal is when you can only see the tail. Well, if the question is there and you got the tail, just pull on it. So the intuitive soul is when we realize that if we ask the universe and we get still enough and be patient and calm our mind, then we get the rest of the story that the intellectual mind can't figure out, because the intuitive awareness works on the process of wholeness, not on the process of division. The mind is like a garbage disposal. It chops everything to bite-sized chunks. But intuition can deliver an entire encyclopedia in one flash of lightning. And then from there, in Steiner's model, we have spirit-soul union, which is the experience of unity with all that is, or often referred to as an enlightenment experience. And so I love understanding the world from having lived through all these minefields like you have, and walked through all these mazes. And, one of the questions I've always asked myself, if this guy's such an expert, why is he sick? Or if this guy's such an expert at biomechanics, why can't he lift weights, run, or jump? And so there you see the observation of the child asking the obvious question that other people won't ask because they're too afraid to be diminished or not get a good enough grade because they pissed the teacher off.
Or appear foolish.
Yeah, or appear foolish. Yeah.
Or not conforming to the authority, which we're conditioned to automatically defer to.
Well, you see, interesting that you say that, though, because I'll give you an interesting sort of sideways on that one. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. My job was to repair weapon systems on Cobra helicopters, which is quite a technical job. There's a lot of, rocket science involved, actually, and electronics. And in the 82nd Combat Aviation Battalion, there's a rule. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. And the reason they have that rule is because when people didn't ask questions that they thought were stupid, it often ended up resulting in aircraft coming down, and mistakes being made because they were afraid to ask a question. So funny enough, inside of an organization that doesn't like you to ask questions, once you start handling $12 million helicopters, they encourage you to ask questions.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I guess sometimes I think the stakes have to be high enough to get to the truth. And war is the ultimate stakes. Because every time you go out, there's a potential for the loss of life, the ultimate price.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the challenge that people are living in today, and we'll get into this because we'll talk about soil and stuff, is that as we've developed, so, you had the Renaissance that occurred, which is the development of the scientific method and moving away from, let's say religious dogmatic beliefs into this scientific, which now has emerged into a scientific belief, and have given us birth of all the technical wonders that we live in today.
Yeah.
So that a person can literally live in life today. And let's say you get a job as a cashier. I think it's one of the most common jobs there is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Produces a lot of back pain.
Yeah, and not to diminish cashiers or anything.
No, it's a function.
But you could go to school for 12 years or even 16 years, get a job as a cashier, swiping various products by and putting things in bags, go home, watch television, be entertained.
Yeah.
Maybe go on a vacation, all-inclusive resort once a year or something, and go through your entire life and not have to know anything about where your food comes from, how your body works, how you came to the opinions that you have. We're so technologically advanced now that you can live life without knowing the basics of survival,
Yeah.
which has been endued throughout humanity. And when you're living in a rural environment, you got to understand soil, you got to understand growing seasons, you got to understand what happens when things don't go wrong.
Yeah.
And now we've created so many buffers that the risks have gone little smaller and smaller and smaller. And so that I think a lot of people are fearful to break out of those things because their lack of wisdom would totally get exposed, and that's a very threatening thing. So it's better to turn on the TV, it's better take a drug, it's better take a pill, let someone else tell me what I need to do, and then I'm good. I'm good because now I'm not going to ruffle the boats. I'm not going to challenge my own self.
Yeah.
And
except I'm good, I'm not going to challenge the system comes hand in hand with I'm good, but I have high blood pressure. I'm good, but my dick doesn't work.
Right.
I'm good, but I'm tired all the time. I'm good, but I can't think straight. I'm good, but my skin's fucked up. I'm good, but I can't shit normally. I'm good, but I spend $800 a month on prescribed drugs. Mm-hmm. And so there you see sort of the trap of becoming unconscious by not questioning authority.
Correct.
By not listening to your deeper intuitive insights and saying, wait a minute, it might have worked for someone else, but it doesn't work for me. I mean, just a good example is vaccinations. People are all hell-bent for leather on these vaccinations. And I say, well, yeah, if you look at the statistics, the actual statistics, the epidemiological statistics of the likelihood of you getting this or that virus or bug, and then you compare that to the fact that you're actually being injected with it, not to mention aluminum and mercury and all sorts of wild crap they're finding in vaccinations that are toxic as hell and don't even belong in there. I say my rational, holistic way of thinking is to look at the pros and look at the cons and say, okay, now let's do some basic math. What's the probability that this is actually going to be better for me in the long run? And with just a little common sense, I can make myself very unpopular and say, I'm not going to do that to my child. I will use homeopathic approaches. I'll use energy medicine approaches. I'll use good diet. I'll use good lifestyle. I'll use sleep. I'll use rest. I'll use movement. I'll use breathing. I'll use hot-cold therapies. And I will trust that the wisdom of nature is alive in my immune system. And we're here after multiple millions of years of evolution through times that were much less sanitary and much more dangerous than they are right now. Now, I'm not trying to sell anti-vaccinations. I'm making the point. The point is that if you don't look on both sides of the coin and realize that when you're in a culture that's highly programmed, that you have to make a decision on the best of your own behalf. Because if you don't make decisions for the best of your own behalf, you diminish your ability to contribute to the people you love, and you diminish the ability to contribute to the world, and you diminish the ability to do the things that you love, because ignorance is not bliss.
No, it's not.
It's simply not bliss.
Ignorance leads to suffering. And in that mentality means that you've actually given up your freedom.
Yes.
The freedom to choose that which I would choose. And society puts a lot of boxes on people in order to conform to this kind of, centralized governmental system of education. And there's benefits to it. I understand that. But for probably most people listening to this podcast, they wouldn't be listening to this podcast if they're really that type of person.
No.
They're not going to resonate with you. They're not going to resonate with me. They're going to shut us off right now and say, hey, I'm done. But if you are still listening, then obviously it's because you probably share the same spirit of exploration and in consciousness and physicality, and how did we get here? Where are we going? What are we doing? And let's enjoy the ride while we go.
I knew I was having a positive impact on the world in 2007 or 2008 when all of a sudden one of my students said, "Did you know you're on Quack Watch?"
Yeah, you've made it.
If
you get to Quack Watch, you've made it, because now there's the system is recognize that you're a threat to their indoctrination program.
So I didn't even know what it was, so I went and looked. And the first thing that just blew my mind is that they have almost every doctor or therapist, especially doctors, that have done anything for the world on that list.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because people, I remember it was about a decade or so, someone was asking me, I said, well, how do I know if someone's good? I said, well, check Quack Watch, be the first place to go. because they're making enough noise that someone who's threatened by that belief needs to start attacking them.
Yeah.
And that's a good sign that somebody's on to something. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some crazies
No,
or
there are some
damaging.
crazies
for sure.
Yeah.
But it's a good start. And then at that point, okay, well, now maybe I can explore that and see if there's an application. I'm not saying go follow quacks or whatever, but I'm saying
not at all.
Just because someone's being attacked doesn't mean that they're true.
Bad.
I mean, I noticed the Einstein poster here, and it says, great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds.
That's my reminder to be true to myself every day and realize that the criticism, the attacks, he's a cult leader, he's a hippie, he's a dope head, whatever the fuck people call me, is just normal for someone who's authentically following their own path into the woods and not going around in a quaint little square with black and white checkers on it, put together by some organization to get a degree or to meet social approval.
Correct.
So it's an interesting journey. But what I'd like to do next is explore your product line and have some discussions around those things. So Wade, looking into your products, you've got several of them. One of the ones that, your interview that I heard with Dave Asprey was all about the enzymes. And I've always had a deep interest in enzymes, and I've read a number of books and lots of research studies and enzyme therapies and various approaches. And so when I came across that, I thought, well, I'm going to test that out. I'm always looking for new enzymes, and as I shared with you, I'd used Wellbeing quite a bit, and one of the reasons I was looking for different enzymes is because even though I was using Wellbeing, is I was getting the kind of reaction that I often get from foods that my body doesn't like, and I just happened to notice by happen chance that I was either traveling or something, but I forgot to take my Wellbeing for a couple of days, and all of a sudden these painful sores I was getting kind of along the crack of my butt cheeks and around the coccyx cleared up. And so I thought, wow, maybe I better try some different enzymes. But when I met you at CanFit Pro and I was talking to you, you said, well, they have ox bile in them. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm genetically allergic to beef. Maybe that's what's doing it. So I went and investigated the ingredients. I didn't find any ox bile, but I did find pork pancreas. Mm-hmm. And I'm very reactive to pork. So I quit using them and I started using your enzymes, and I've really, really enjoyed them. I find them easy on the body. I've been taking sometimes, I let my soul guide me, but sometimes 7 at a time, plus 2 of the Capex. In the morning, I'll take the Capex. I typically take 5 of the MassZymes and 2 of the Capex in the morning, and then at lunch I take typically 2 more Capex. And then with your suggestion, I don't take the Capex at night because of the energizing effect and potential to make it harder to go to sleep. But I've really felt good on them, and my clients have felt the same, and I've definitely noticed that I'm able to actually get by with less sleep. It's not that I don't still feel the fatigue, but somehow it's as though I have more support metabolically, like I'm not collapsing into myself, and with, a new 2-month and 1-week-old child that screws your sleep up, and Mana is 3.5, and they both sleep in the bed, so it's kind of like sleeping in the middle of Times Square in Manhattan or something. The action never stops all night long, and Angie's up and down changing diapers and breastfeeding, and kids start crying and wiggling. So, there's, my sleep deprivation is not because I'm ignoring myself. It's just a part of being a daddy and loving your kids. But, I do a lot of work and I need a good mental focus. So I definitely noticed when I started using the Capex enzymes that it wasn't having as significant of a negative effect on me. I felt as though I had more in the tank, would be the best analogy I could give it. I wasn't getting that kind of tapped out, like if I don't go lay down right now, I'm going to get a bad headache and I'm not going to be able to function at all. But when you look at enzymes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a single biochemical reaction in the body that is independent of enzyme activity, is there?
Not that I'm aware of. It's
there's
they've identified, I think, 25,000, and still keep identifying more reactions. So an enzyme is a catalyst.
Yes, yeah.
And I always say everything from thinking to blinking requires an enzyme, and really the more of those, they're what do work in the body. There's only two things that really do work in the body. That's probiotics, which are their own independent organisms, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and then enzymes, which are responsible for every chemical reaction. If you go back to Dr. Edward Howell, who was really kind of the pioneering father of the enzymes in North America.
Book on my desk.
Yeah, he wrote Enzyme Nutrition, which is a great book, and Food Enzymes for Health and Longevity.
I think that might be the one I've got.
Yeah, and he did some really great research, and this is what led to us getting into enzymes. And I had my crisis that I outlined earlier in the podcast, and what I learned at that time was I had been eating enzymatically deficient foods virtually my entire life. And so humans are the only species on the planet that do not eat their food in a raw state. Yeah. So a tiger will knock down a zebra, and it'll eat the entrails first, and then where the enzymes and probiotics are present, and then it eats the rest of the thing. A horse or a cow will go select the freshly sprouted grass with the most enzymatically rich products it can get. An omnivore like a bear will eat its salmon raw, it'll eat its blueberries raw, you know. But what we've done with the explosion of the population worldwide is we've created a system of food production and distribution that takes out the enzymes, either through
to make it last on the shelf.
To make it last. And so I'm not condemning that. That was just a way to famine and starvation was a big issue for humanity throughout history. So we solved that problem, but in solving that problem, we created another one because we had a narrow definition of what food is. Food is protein, fats, carbohydrates, maybe some fiber, and a couple of minerals that's thrown down in a nutrition book, and that's it.
Well, also, the big disease of our culture is thinking that food is just energy.
Correct.
Like gasoline. You can shop for cheap gasoline. You can shop for cheap food. It's just energy. Right?
Correct.
Before we go on, you use the word catalyst, I think, because I don't want people to be going, what the hell is a catalyst? Why don't you define a catalyst for people that may not understand that? Because I think if we use words that people don't understand, their brain will stop right there.
Sure. Basically, it is, how would I summarize this? It is a source that transforms one thing into another or accelerates the speed of that transformation.
Without losing its own unique identity.
Right.
So the catalyst can be part of an equation that produces something very different that wouldn't be able to happen without the catalyst.
Correct.
But at the completion of that process, the enzyme can still be there to do more work.
Correct. And that is essentially the conversion of proteins into amino acids, which is what our body we don't need protein, we need the amino acids, and that breakdown is an essential component of the digestive health process. Yeah. And for my own self, one of the challenges that I had as a vegetarian is like, how do I actually convert that? First off, I'm not getting as much protein as, say, someone who's eating a meat-based diet.
Right.
Second of all, a lot of the plants that are consuming have probably been altered through monoculturing. And so if we look at the history of nutrition, even at the turn of the century, U.S. Congress was concerned about the degradation of the protein content of wheat. Wheat was about 90% protein back then, according to the research studies the U.S. government had put forth. Now it's less than 7%.
Yeah, there's been a significant loss in the protein content. In fact, I've got a study that showed that, Ehrenfried Pfeiffer grew wheat and various grains biodynamically, and this was in the 50s, and his biodynamically grown wheat, if I remember it, was 23 to 28% protein. Well, a piece of chicken's about 23% protein. Most people don't realize a gram of meat is not a gram of protein.
Correct.
70% of that is water right out of the gate. I've seen like cuts of beef reach 55% protein, which is really high. Certain foods can get quite high. But Pfeiffer's research showed that the commercially raised wheats were around 12% protein. So there's a big jump from 23 to 12%.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when third world countries are offered grain for their starving people, and the United States offers grain, if any other country offers grain, they will always take the other countries because they found that starving children eating American-raised grains stay starving.
Yes.
It does not actually help them. They might as well be eating straw.
Correct.
And another point with enzymes that you kind of triggered me to bring up is what a lot of vegetarians don't realize is that in plant foods, protein is tied up in fiber.
Correct.
So if you don't have enough enzymatic activity to break the fiber down, you cannot unlock the complex to get the proteins or amino acids out of it. And I think a lot of people really overlook that.
It's a huge oversight, and I can speak from personal experience because when I made the switch to vegetarianism, and then I got into this enzymatic thing. I said, well, what if I followed the raw food diet, right?
Yeah.
So I've literally followed a raw food diet for 2 years, never ate a piece of cooked food for 2 years. And what I started to notice is the same thing that most vegetarians experience, the lack of recovery ability, starting to see that degradation and realizing there's something going on here that I'm missing out. And that led me to the study of, well, what happens when you grow food on mineral deficient soil, and the relation of protein being converted to enzymes in order to grow the plant. Then of course they add in fertilizers or chemicals to add nitrogen to grow it, and then the immune system weakens of that particular plant. Then they add herbicides and pesticides and fungicides, all which interrupt enzymatic activity.
And rodenticides.
Yeah, and so now. It goes on with suicide and homicide. If it's an aside, it has to look out.
It's an aside that's not too far aside.
Yeah. So I realized is like, okay, if all of these agents, which we're all exposed to regardless of what diet you're following, I'm ultimately going to cultivate challenges within my digestive system or my enzymatic pathways. And I do believe that people gravitate to different types of diet based on that might be the only pathways that haven't been damaged from their current modern diet. So I see a lot of people who eat a high sugar diet as children end up gravitating towards a ketogenic diet because they've blown out their carbohydrate metabolism. I see a lot of people that have been on a really high meat diet, like factory farming, chemicals with hormones and all these sort of things, all of a sudden get to a point and they say, oh, I go to a vegetarian diet and I feel better. What they're mistaking is they're getting the result from the change. And there's a detoxification benefit or whatever, or you're on a pathway that you have is operating better. And so they see the benefits and they associate the benefits with the diet as opposed to understanding that they're just getting the benefits because their body has the capacity to digest that. I believe when you hit what I believe is full capacity as a human organism, that you can do well on virtually any diet if your ability to digest, absorb, and utilize that food is at full capability. So people say, well, wait, would you ever go to a meat-based diet? Sure, if I felt that was, if I went and my testing showed that that's what I needed to go, then that's what I would do. I'm not stuck in this rigid idea. It just so happens it's working for me now and has been for almost 20 years. But that doesn't mean it's going to continue to work for me. But what I did develop and with Matt and our company is to say, well, let's optimize all our enzymatic pathways. Now, particularly with our first product, MassZymes, we focused on this particular challenge because how do I maintain muscle mass as a vegetarian? How do I compete at a world championship level eating 85 grams of protein a day as opposed to 250 grams, and all of them coming from plant sources, which, like you said, oftentimes are bound up in these structures that make it difficult to break that or extract the amino acids that I require out of that. So Matt and I got to work on it, and because the people I learned from, none of them were working out.
Oh yeah,
they were nutritionists, but they weren't exercise people. And I said, well, they got one piece of the equation, but they don't got the whole picture. So I took it upon myself, and Matt and I the beauty of it is being on polar opposites of the channel was
diet
the
spectrum,
advantage.
yeah.
Is like, hey, let's get something that works universally for both of us. And what we found is a lot of people who have trouble recovering is because they're not converting the protein that they're eating, regardless of the diet they're on,
Yeah.
into the amino acids they need to recover. They're not able to activate those enzymatic pathways of recovery or brain function, or you see people who are depressed aren't able to convert proteins into amino acids to create the polypeptide chains to make their neurochemistry work, the various neurochemicals. And so we said, well, let's start there. And we came up with MassZymes, enzyme for the masses. And that is 17 different enzymes that we included inside that process with a heavy emphasis on proteases, using protease 3.0, 4.5, and 6.0. People, well, why are those designations? And that relates to the pH range that they work in as they go through the digestive process. Because when you digest food, if it's okay for your listeners,
pHs at different stages.
I'll go through the basic background, and then I'll show where the 3 areas that people can run into problems.
Yeah.
So the first stage, you chew the food, and it goes down the esophagus and into your stomach. And it's about 30 to 60 minutes before hydrochloric acid is going to come in and start working on that. What's supposed to happen is the enzymes present in the food, after being masticated, involved in a high temperature environment inside the body, now you accelerate the breakdown of those materials, and your essential amino acids start to cleave at that very high, closer to alkaline level. So let's say the food comes in at neutral, let's say it's 7 or thereabouts. Well, then it's going to go to 6, and then it's going to go to 5, and then it's going to go to 4 as the hydrochloric acid builds up inside the intestinal
all the way
tract.
down to 0.1.
Correct. And then different amino acids cleave in those critical factors. And if you don't cleave them there, what happens is you're left with an undigested protein sitting in your intestinal tract, which becomes feed for bad bacteria.
Well, there's another thing that you triggered me that I wanted to share, because I've done a lot of work with people that have fungal and parasite infections, and I've had to heal myself from various parasite infections, and I've had a chronic fungal infection. I got a deep fungal infection, which means it actually gets through the intestinal wall into the body. And once you have one of those, you can never get rid of it. You have to manage it. I've never seen anyone or known of anyone that could say they cured a deep fungal infection. I say, if they have, I say, here, eat this lollipop and watch what happens. And here it comes. And so, having analyzed the diets of probably thousands of people and looking at what parasites they had, and one of the most common parasite infections is worm parasites. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I researched all these different parasites, and one of the things that I found is worm parasites are very high in C-reactive proteins, which are also called shock proteins, which our cells use to have elasticity. And then I thought, I'm looking at the diet logs, and most of these people are just eating crap food, microwave cooked, overdone, commercially farmed garbage food. And you could see that their skin didn't have a much elasticity to it. You get the kind of the California beach babe that's burnt, the wrinkled kind of 42-year-old California beach girl whose skin looks like she's 60 because she's brown and spent too much time in the sun, but her skin got cooked,
Yep.
And so I begin to wonder, would the body harvest parasites for fresh, raw protein, especially an animal like a worm with C-reactive protein? And because the parasites are living organisms, they're going to have a lot of enzymes in them because they're raw. And so I spoke to this with a very, very famous scientist, soil scientist, and scientist of a number of types, a guy named Philip Callahan, who's done all sorts of great research, and I won't go into it, it'd be a long story. And I also spoke to Arden Anderson, who wrote the book Science and Agriculture, and he's a rare guy because he's an osteopathic physician, and he's got a PhD in soil science, and he worked for the United States Air Force taking care of pilots as a medical doctor, but he's also a consultant and expert in soil science. And both of them said, you got a good theory there. I don't know if it's right, but it seems very, very logical. So as you were talking, I was just wanting to share that, when people eat these deficient diets, and they're not getting enough enzymes, they're not eating food with enzymes, they're cooking too much. And another one that I find is a big problem is pasteurized foods, because the pasteurization by definition means all enzymes are dead. So the only way you can run something like that through mouth to anus is to suck the enzymes right out of your body. Aaron Fried Pfeiffer said in about 57 that most people's enzyme pathways were depleted by about 32 to 35 years of age, based on his research. And he was trained by Rudolf Steiner, and he was considered to be the first biochemist in the United States, the original biochemist. And his lectures are excellent. Even today, if you were to listen to him, you'd hear this guy lecturing in 1957 and go, wow, if this guy was on stage today, he'd be considered a badass dude. So I just think that, as you're talking and we're talking about these enzymes, I think there's a lot of connections that a lot of people don't make. And you can run around chasing and parasite kill, but I've watched people get 10 parasite infections in a row because they're not changing their diet, or they're not changing their rest habits, or they're not changing the foundational principles to support the immune system. And they keep, shopping for more supplements and more herbs and more bugs, but more drugs or whatever, but they're not really addressing the actual issue. And I think part of the reason I bring that up and I share it with my students in classes is Mother Nature has got many very elaborate systems for balancing us. And lo and behold, I've found several research studies showing on multiple occasions when researchers would infect themselves with certain parasites, that ailments that they'd had for years would clear up. Then when they would kill the parasites, the ailment come back. One researcher had Crohn's disease. And when he infected himself with hookworm, the Crohn's disease completely cleared up. Then when he killed the hookworm, the Crohn's disease came back. And I found several papers showing this kinds of stuff. And so I tell people all the time, be careful about thinking this is just a supplementation issue. You got to look at what's really missing in your diet and what's missing in your lifestyle, so that you can handle this thing with a circumferential view. And I think, that you and I think along the same lines that way.
Yeah. That's part of it comes, I think, too, is what we talked earlier about education. And there is a pattern in people who are chronically suffering, I think, become identified as a victim. And they subtly continue to choose methodologies to stay broken.
Yes.
As opposed to accepting full responsibility for what's going on in their life, being at peace with what's going on, and saying, this is an opportunity for learning. I'm getting feedback telling me what I'm currently doing in my life isn't working. And can I let go of what I think I know to learn what
I need to learn?
Right? And to continue on. And of course, there's no greater addiction than having a healthy body. It feels wonderful. It feels magical.
And not to mention that learning by definition is a measure of one's capacity to change their behavior.
Yes.
You can have a knowledge full of ideas about diet and lifestyle, but if you can't change your behavior, all you've got is a log of ideas in your head, and now you're just, a walking computer, and computers don't eat.
Correct.
Except electrons.
Correct. And so, coming full circle, that's what led us to kind of go down that road. And if we go back to the digestive piece, where we are in those immediate cleaving of the amino acids first, and as well as the other, we have there's 17 different enzymes. We don't have to go into all the different ones that some break down fiber, some break down dairy products, some break down fats, lipases, and things like that. And so once that chime is completed, hopefully you have enough hydrochloric acid inside the body, which most people don't. Most people don't.
Yeah, that's a major cause of parasite problems.
I ran into that problem. So I had literally been on the enzyme program for a decade, or this was even more than that, and taking my probiotics. Didn't take HCl because I started this as a younger fellow, and I got a little older and my hydrochloric acid production goes down. I was in Bali, contracted a parasite. Katrine, my genetic expert, I sent some tests to her, and she's like, "Oh, you got a hitchhiker." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I got this parasite." Well, I had a crazy experience. I ended up experimenting with some electronic technology. Apparently, the parasite was in my gallbladder.
Okay,
I zapped it. It ran up my nervous system and started eating my eye.
Yeah, that can happen.
And almost lost my eye out of it.
Toxocara is a eye lover.
Yeah, and fortunately, I was able to save it thanks to my eye doctor and my chiropractor who figured out what was going on in Katrina. And so she said, "Well, Wade, that's just testament that you're hydrochloric acid." And of course, me going, "Katrina, I'm the digestive health guy. How's that possible? Like, geez." And she's like, "Well, hey, man, I'm just looking at the results. Are you open?" So I started taking hydrochloric acid in addition to my process, and bang, it was significant. I noticed a really big improvement. So I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm at that age that hydrochloric acid." So that's the next piece.
Can I interject?
Yeah, please.
You mentioned earlier that the hydrochloric acid usually doesn't come out for about an hour. There's a caveat there.
Go ahead.
As soon as you drink coffee, you start producing hydrochloric acid.
Yeah.
So when people are drinking coffee with meals or right before meals, they're completely disrupting the normal cycle of hydrochloric acid enzymatic interactions. And I first learned this on our farm because, cows will sometimes eat metal and pieces of fences. And every now and then we'd have to call in the vet, and they would stick a magnet all the way down their throat and try to get into their stomach. And I've seen them pull out like foot-long pieces of barbed wire. I'm like, how in the fuck did they even swallow that? But what happens is when they get metal or objects like that in the stomach, it traumatizes the stomach, and they can't produce hydrochloric acid in reaction to the stress. And so then they stop digesting properly, and they get diarrhea and all sorts of shit, and they stop producing milk. So I remember being there with the vet, and the vet said to my dad, "Could you please go make me the strongest pot of coffee you've ever made?" And my dad said, "Sure." And he said, "Bring it to me." And he said, "When it's done, put some ice in it to cool it down." And then my dad, I wonder what the hell he's going to do with this pot of coffee. He thought maybe the vet was really tired or something. Well, the vet squeezes the cow's jaw to force the cow to open its mouth, puts a block of rubber between its teeth, picks the cow's head up, and pours the entire pot of jet black coffee into the cow's stomach. And my dad said, "What in the world is that for?" And he said, "This triggers hydrochloric acid production in the stomach." So I first learned that from a vet. And then having worked with many patients that had stomach ulcers, I found one of the most common things that stomach ulcer patients do is they drink coffee, particularly black coffee, on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and they have hydrochloric acid. Many of them are dehydrated, so the mucous membrane shrinks and it can't get protected, and they're overproducing hydrochloric acid, so it actually burns the cells in the stomach out, and then they can't produce hydrochloric acid because they've burned out the cells.
Beautifully said. Said. That's accurate. Then, and of course, then on that second stage coming out of the intestinal tract, that's when your mineral content bicarbonate buffers need to buffer that acid to get that pH back up to a more neutral level, or you get into that's where people get into the duodenal ulcers and things like that when you're getting a spillover effect. So if you don't produce enough hydrochloric acid, the esophageal sphincter stays open, and you splash up, and you get heartburn and acid reflux. It's not because of too much acid; it's because you're not making enough. And they put people on proton pumps.
One of the most common misdiagnoses I see is people come to me with reflux, and they've been put on antacids. And the first thing I say to them, I said, "We got to test you for parasites then."
Yeah.
Because if you are on antacids, you're shutting down whatever hydrochloric acid you had in there. And almost everyone that I've ever seen, I used to do Heidelberg capsule tests on people all the time. I never met a single person that was producing even close to normal amounts of hydrochloric acid that were put on antacids. So basically what they're doing is just using a sort of a formula. If you got these symptoms, take this product, but they don't really know what's happening, and it sets people up for serious parasite problems because the hydrochloric acid is the number one defense against any kind of living organism coming in that you shouldn't have in your body.
Yeah, it's a big part of your immune system to wipe out pathogenic organisms. Yeah. And then that final stage, it goes into the food will then transit out, it gets buffered and goes into your intestinal tract. And that's where the flora start to work on it, the good and I always say there's 10% good, 10% bad, and 80% opportunists as far as bacteria goes, and
good.
depending on
The
your
good, the
lifestyle.
bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I love that film.
My father was the special effects man on that
Oh,
film.
I watched that movie with my dad, so it was one of my first westerns that I remember.
Yeah.
So, and then of course now today with the reduction of the amount of organisms that we naturally get, because when I grew a carrot in the garden, or my parents did,
Yeah.
you take it out, you brush a little dirt off it, and you eat it, and the bacteria that are connected to that come with it.
Even if you wash it in the hose, there's still dirt in the cracks. I mean, you can see it. We grow our own produce at home, but we also get a delivery from an organic farm, and so it comes, and there's still some dirt on it. But I give it a quick. Like if I'm eating one myself or my kid, I don't try to super wash it or scrub it. I just surface clean it and hand it to Mana to chew or me to chew, and you're still getting a nice regular dose of probiotics, but that's not something you want to do from a commercial farm.
Right. And then of course all this, what we've developed in the modern world, we've created these amazing antibiotic remedies.
Anti-life.
But then we've overused them outside. And of course, the fellow that originally developed antibiotics was concerned that there would be an overprescription of them over time. And now we're at a state where we have these bacteria or antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria, superbugs. Because anytime you try to exterminate any species,
they just adapt.
They adapt.
Yeah.
And now we're in that in sort of medical situations. So I have a friend who is a world-class surgeon, put the first stent in the body, and he said, the interesting thing, he says, surgery's come so far in the last 30 to 40 years. He says, it blows him away what they can do now. He says, the difference is now 50% of the people who don't have successful surgery is not because the surgery wasn't successful, it's because they got infected in the hospital with one of these bacteria or antibiotic resistant strains bacteria cultures, and that becomes a problem. And so those three areas, not enough enzymes present in the food, and as you age, Dr. Howell talked about how you have an enzymatic pool that begins to diminish over time. And he showed with other different species how by third generation of enzymatically deficient diets, they developed genetic-based diseases, strange sociological behavior, and the inability to procreate.
And you see this in Pottinger's cats as well.
That's exactly it.
Because he cooked their food.
Correct.
And he showed that, I think it was by the third generation, the cats even lost their sexual preference. The males were trying to have sex with males and females with females.
Yep.
He showed you could throw the cats in the air and they couldn't land on their feet. They would just crash.
Yep.
And you could, hurt them because they lost their balance and sense of spatial orientation. Their anthropometrics were disrupted, so the rate of head to body size or limb to torso size, and that's pretty serious when you consider that a lot of that comes from killing enzymes.
Well, think about when you look at when we talked earlier about the development of modern food production and distribution.
Yeah,
we've been on that chain very heavily since World War II.
Yes,
and now we're into third generation.
Yes, I tell my students all the time, you are the third generation, your kids are the fourth generation, and the fourth generations didn't survive in Pottinger's study.
And what do you see? You see an explosion of genetic-based diseases.
Yes.
You've seen sociological behavior which is not supportive of humans. And you see all of these fertility clinics going up everywhere because people don't have the ability to procreate.
And I tell them, if you can't procreate naturally, and you go to a fertility clinic and you don't change the prerequisite factors that will make you fertile, chances of you giving birth to a child that's got serious problems and chaining you to a very tough life as a parent is very, very real. Now, there are some people, of course, that have genetic issues that stop them from fertility. In other words, not everyone is a diet and lifestyle case. So for those people, I say do whatever you want to do and need to do to become parents and share that beautiful experience with the world. But many, many people have hired me because they had issues and the husband and wife couldn't get pregnant. It was either one of them or both of them. And 100% of them within 6 months is the longest it's ever taken me, just following what I teach in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and my 4-doctor model. And, other specific modifications, whether it be enzymatic products or key nutritional supports or, body therapies or breathing practices. But in general, it's all just returning our bodies back to the natural rhythms and eating the natural foods that are necessary for it. And you see that a lot of this stuff isn't necessary. But as you know, the dragon in the details here is that this is highly profitable. So the medical system's not going to teach you how to eat. It's not going to tell you what this stuff's coming from because it would kill their business. Mm-hmm. It's a disease maintenance business system.
Yeah.
And so if we don't, pay attention to what we're doing and we keep kind of doing what we've talked about, letting your schooling get in the way of your education, mm-hmm. then the pain teacher shows up with quite great vengeance.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where a lot of people have found themselves, regardless of the dietary practice they're following, because of the fundamental assumption that everything in that digestive system is working.
Yes.
And that's, if there's any message that I want to get out today, is that, hey, is your digestion system actually working the way it was designed and natural to do? And if it is, you should be able to be successful on almost any type of diet.
Yeah.
If it's in its optimal state.
Yes. You should be able to do that. But one, there's always feedback indicators such as mental clarity, energy levels, sleep quality, mm-hmm. cognition quality, mm-hmm. skin quality, recovery from exercise. I mean, the body's always telling you, giving you a report card, but we're so in such a culture that just keeps drugging anything that you have to be a bug bites your nose and the next thing you know, you're on a drug. I mean, everybody's trying to avoid the feedback loop, which is just like the most dangerous thing in the world. So though I from my own experience, I teach a system of metabolic typing that's totally based on working with your body, using muscle testing and connecting to your soul and logging your symptoms mm-hmm. against what you eat. So you can correlate symptoms against foods taken in, drinks taken in, supplements taken in. And between that muscle testing and soul connection, you get the guidance that you need. And people say to me all the time, well, what is your diet? I say, well, it depends. If I did deadlifts yesterday, it's very carnivorous for about 2 days. But if I haven't worked out in 2 days, I can eat a vegetarian diet and feel fantastic. In fact, if I eat a bunch of meat, I feel all clogged up, foggy-headed, dull, like someone threw a wet blanket over my head. So what I've found is that we are very, very dynamic, and that if we listen to our body, we can find out that you'd actually have to read every diet book on the shelf, because otherwise you would be narrowing your responses back. And then we've got the issues of our biochemistry is constantly changing, the environment's constantly changing, stress factors. So if all of a sudden you need nutrients that are only available in leafy greens, but you're on a carnivore diet, well, guess what? You're going to have to eat a lot of frickin' pounds of meat to get what comes out of kale or collard greens or whatever. But I think that if we work with our bodies and we pay attention, that we can not. I'm agreeing with you and saying yes, we can eat about any type of diet when we're healthy. But I'm also saying that it's not just as simple as eating any type of diet, just like willy-nilly. It means tapping in and saying, well, what does my body need versus what does my programmed mind have an addiction to?
You pointed out something that it's exact methodology that we came to the conclusions that we did, and that was with our clients is writing down what is the biofeedback response mechanism, mm-hmm. and our more advanced students cultivate it muscle testing in order to check in and to learn, to relearn. I think muscle testing is kind of a physical form of tapping into your intuition. And we've got away from
unconscious.
And so for those who don't know about muscle testing, it's a kinesiological test where you can, any single cell organism will remove itself from a toxic substance. So you put a single cell organism by mercury, it recoils.
Yes.
And you put it next to a nutrient that it requires, it'll actually move towards
right to it.
And that foundational, almost binary response, that which supports life and that's what's against it, is what's created the human nervous system. And you can re-tap into that, sometimes known as intuition, that which supports life, that which doesn't. And through a muscle test, eventually over time, if you do this enough, you actually start to feel the truth before
Absolutely.
you even hit the test. You kind of
do.
can feel it. And,
Yes.
and so that's a process that takes a while to learn and tap into. But once you get it, then you use that in conjunction with your own feedback, and you can become a master of what's right for you at the right time. And that's where I love for people to get to, and that's our goal.
Yeah. And the other thing too is pain always has an inhibitory effect on the motor system. Mm-hmm. And almost anything that you're eating that's causing you trouble is going to have an inflammatory response, which the symptoms of which are pain, heat, redness, and swelling. So if and your body not only looks at the food when you're looking at it or the bottle, but your body can do something even more cool. It can read the energy field coming right through the bottle.
Yes.
And so you don't even need to know. And there are millions of tests on muscle testing, and I've done this with students lots of times. I hide stuff in packages, let them mix them up, and say, watch, your body will show you which of these packages has processed sugar and which one has organic raisins in it every friggin' time, unless you have an addiction. Then your system is cross-wired. But the point that I'm getting at is muscle testing works because our psychic capacity is to read the energy, and our intellectual process is to know what we're looking at.
Correct.
And the physiological process is, well, we just ate that yesterday and it's already causing us pain. So if you want to know the truth, yes, you're weak and you're going to stay weak. So don't eat it. So, and it's funny to me because so many of these left brain, overly scientific people think muscle testing is a bunch of bullshit. In fact, I had someone do a podcast with me, and she was a naturopathic doctor, and she started harping on me because I teach people muscle testing to identify their diet, and she said, oh, that doesn't work. They've shown that in research that doesn't work. And I said, well, you got to realize it often doesn't work because when you go into the testing with the intention of making sure it doesn't work, you've already skewed the experiment anyhow.
Correct.
And second of all, you're doing research on people that are so far out of touch with themselves, they don't half the time even know their own name and address. So you don't research sick people to find out what you can do when you're in a more normal state. And in my system, I say, look, some of you aren't going to be able to muscle test because you don't trust yourself, or you're afraid, or you don't want to know the answer. Like if you're testing chocolate chip cookies and you love them, you might test positive, i.e., yes, I can eat the cookies, without realizing that you're consciously overriding your body's internal feedback mechanism. I mean, an example of that is how many times you've been tired, but you wanted to finish a movie. Your body said, go to sleep, screw the movie, but your ego said, no, I want to watch the movie. Well, if your body says, get rid of the fucking cookies, and your ego says, I want the cookies, you're subduing the information.
Yep.
So part of the problem is you have to be very honest in listening to your body and doing the muscle test, or you're not going to get good results. So I was saying to this doctor, how many people do you actually think are qualified to actually be a legitimate study in a subjects in a study like that? Well, she didn't like that, and basically my approach was saying that you can't just throw supplements at everybody and use supplements. And there were a supplement company, and the next thing you know, they sent me an email saying, we're not publishing your podcast.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't surprise me. No big deal.
Yeah.
I'm only sad I came in on a Saturday and missed 2 hours of, good reading time or sauna time or stone lifting time or painting time to try to share with the world. But it just makes the point. Some people just don't want to know the truth, especially it gets in the way of profits.
Yeah. And I think going back to how does one cultivate that in their own life, and that is you need to be exposed to someone who is a good muscle tester.
Yeah.
And I had that good fortune.
Yeah.
I have a brilliant chiropractor he's literally he's done millions and millions of tests, and he's a very elaborate system of developing things. And through testing with him in conjunction with me, I got to feel what the truth felt like.
Yes.
Right? What supported my system. Yeah. And then as I developed my own muscle testing, I was able to do that on my own over time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think you can't underestimate of being with someone who's able to produce those results and learning the mechanisms of how they're able to produce that results. Yeah. And then what does the truth feel like?
Exactly. And the truth has a feeling because the truth is a value.
It does.
Truth is based on value.
Yeah.
It's not based on intellect, right? There's lots of things that we read about drugs, for example, or about vitamins or supplements that are so-called scientifically proven and therefore true. But when it comes to our own inner experience, which is based on feelings, which is based on values psychologically, it doesn't match the internal value system that we have. In other words, it might be some vitamin, but you might not know it's synthetically produced. And even though the truth is you need the vitamin, the value is it's not the real deal. I need the real deal.
Yes.
It's kind of like the tocopherol, alpha tocopherol, the left spin and right spin of the molecules, one synthetic and one's
DL
not.
versus D.
Versus DL versus
D,
right?
Yeah.
And one's
the DL's the left spin that is no good for you.
Right. So
useless.
People might have the truth. They need that supplement, but the body might be saying, I don't value that choice.
Correct.
And that's part of our problem is we've got so detached with our feelings and we've become people that read books written by other people, which is usually the diet that worked for them as though it was the gospel and it's universally applied. Kind of like the China study. When the China study came out, everywhere I went, everybody's saying, oh, do you eat the China study diet? Do you eat the diet like the China study? I'm like, I'm not a Chinaman. Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's beautifully said. So, again, and now I get to the point now, talking about the energy field, is I can walk into a health food store, for example, and almost energetically kind of scan things and be like, oh, what's this?
Yes.
And I can feel something there I'm being led to,
Yes.
and I might see some ingredients I'm not aware of, and I'm like, okay, well, who's this company? What's it making? What's inside of this? And generally it'll lead you to a person.
Yes.
And you talk to that person, you're like, aha!
Yes.
Someone has found the truth within that, and they've condensed that into something that can be of service to mankind.
Yes.
A percentage. But you can't know anything if you can't, the content doesn't mean anything unless you understand the context.
Yes, exactly. And I love the way you have, 17 different enzymes working at different pH levels because my experience is most enzymes aren't that comprehensive. So you may have the right idea, I need an enzyme, but you may actually get an enzyme that's not right for the macromolecule you need to break down, or the pH levels of your body, or the phase of digestion. And it seems to me like you've kind of put a goaltender in every corner in there.
Well, there's a couple things on top of that and I think a lot of the enzyme companies out there take advantage of the enzyme story and create what I call a commercially viable product.
Yeah.
So they're building their product, which is based on margin, not based on efficacy. Right? Like, does it work?
Yeah.
And when Matt and I started this company, we made a vow that we would never compromise the effect for profits.
Right.
We were going to go, even if it was the most expensive product in the world, we felt that there's nothing more expensive than a product that doesn't work. It doesn't matter what you pay for.
That's exactly right.
If you spend $2 or 2 cents or $5, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
And so we bake that into not only our production or how we produce products, but how we guarantee products when they try it. So they try it, they don't like it, send us back the leftover or the empty ball or the unused balls, we give the money back, and that's fine. So we reduce that risk because we can't say with absolute certainty that everything that we're going to do is going to correct everybody because there's too many variances.
There's too many variables.
Too many variances. But we do get a lot of people that do get positive results because we have kind of, like you said, put the goaltenders in, put the defense mechanisms. We also added an interesting ingredient called AstraZyme, which is an extract of the astragalus root, which is used widely in Chinese medicine. And it has an interesting effect of amplifying the effects of enzymes by 30 to 50%.
Wow. So
by adding that in, it's actually astragalus is one of the primary herbs used in Chinese medicine throughout a lot of different conjunctions. So
which
we added
makes it
that
a synergist.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that amplifies the effect. We went really high on proteolytic enzymes. So for a serving size has over 100,000 what's called huts, which is enzymes have this weird, there's SAPUs, there's huts, there's all this. So for proteases, you always want to look for huts. And so when you compare it apples to oranges or apples to apples and different products, we take care of them on all the different proteases, all the other products to make a truly premium blend. And it's cultured enzymes.
Yeah.
So a cultured enzyme is an enzyme that's grown on very specific medians And over a food enzyme, it'll be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times more potent. It's like if you create an enzyme, if you take an enzyme out of, say,
Tomato.
papaya or tomato or something, it'll have a certain potency to it.
Yeah.
But if you grow that tomato on a specific, biodynamic soil and the right environment with the things, you can get a much more potent enzyme and more potent nutrient quality. Well, you can do the same thing with cultured enzymes by taking time. So it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to produce the enzymes that we make. So we have to, scale up our production slowly because it's very capital intense. And we've done that over the last 15 years, and we've been grateful for it because there's a lot of people out there who've, responded positively. They use these enzymes and it's changed their lives.
One of the things I wanted to get into before we shift off, and you may have already been thinking about this, but using enzymes for digestion versus proteolytic enzymes for cleaning the body up. I've used enzymes to aid recovery from training for as long as I can remember. I've been reading, people like Paul C. Bragg and Bernard Jensen and the old pioneers, and so, a lot of my core research I did was with pioneers to really get the basics, whether it be soil science or health or, the Marion Pottingers and the Weston A. Prices of the world, because I found those guys were legitimate scientists. They were looking for the truth. They weren't, trying to get a paycheck from some corporation. Actually, I've seen experts say that today scientists are the modern prostitutes of the world. They're for hire, and as long as you pay them, they'll get you the results that you're after, which kind of kills our ability to trust anything that's validated by science. But I think the concept of proteolytic enzymes versus digestive enzymes and understanding those concepts, could you share some concepts and tips for people so they might know how and when they can support their training or general recovery or help reduce inflammation, be it from stress, because EMF pollution is causing a lot of inflammation in bodies now. So what would be some suggestions so people know how to differentiate? Do you need different enzymes? How do you use them? When do you use them? And those kinds of tips.
Yeah, great segue. So enzymes are often classified as digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes.
Right.
A systemic enzyme, like, for example, serrapeptase, which breaks down fiber inside the body, or scar tissue, is very effective, but it won't help you break down your steak.
Right.
If you take a high-quality proteolytic enzyme, like MassZymes, on an empty stomach, it'll instantly become a systemic enzyme.
Okay.
I'll give you evidence of that. So I had a friend of mine, she had a huge scar on her shoulder. She had a necrosis. She got bitten by a spider and it created a necrosis thing, and she had this scar. It was about probably a half-inch raised. It was very prominent and about maybe 2.5, 3 inches long on her shoulder. And she had it for years, and she was an acrobat and had actually become so much scar tissue she couldn't do some of her rope work because she'd get this pain in her shoulder. And so we became friends, and I said, I'd like to do an experiment with you if you're open to it. And she's like, sure. I said, would you take 5 of these MassZymes every morning upon waking before you eat, and take it again during the day before you do your exercise routine? She said, great. And she was pretty responsive. So she would take those enzymes, and within 15 minutes, she'd start getting redness on that particular point. And at first it would start to itch.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, this is curious. And I'm like, well, let's keep this going on. So she kept this up for 9 months, and the scar kept getting smaller and smaller and getting lower and lower. And the coloring started to take onto her skin so much that her 4-year-old daughter, she was holding her 4-year-old daughter, and she grabbed her shoulder and she goes, Mommy, your scar's gone.
Yeah, that's wild.
And that was a wonderful experiment that I got to see of the effect over an extended period of time of what can be possible.
And that was the MassZymes.
That was the MassZymes.
No specific other formulations.
No.
This has really important application to women who have cesarean section scars, hysterectomy scars, and almost any surgical scar. A lot of people don't realize scars can be very, very debilitating to the kinesiology, to the integrated timing of the motor system. They develop really nasty trigger points that can shut other muscles down, set up satellite trigger point systems. when scars contract, when scar tissue forms, there's actually myofibroblasts in them. So there's actually muscle fibers inside of a scar. And those muscle fibers are responsible for what's called the pursing effect, which pulls the wound together to close the wound up. But once that pursing effect finishes, by about 6 months, the scar is basically reached its full maturity, and it's extremely hard to work with after that point. And I've seen countless athletes with chronic knee problems that wouldn't heal, but tracked it right back down to the pathology in the scars from the orthopedic surgeon's scopes. And their layers of tissue are stuck together. Shoulders. I mean, the list is long, but the point I'm getting at is what you're sharing here is very, very important knowledge for the myriad of people, especially athletes, that have surgical scars and have chronic neck pain, back pain, and don't realize that the entire synchronicity of the motor system can be very terribly disrupted by scar tissue.
Yeah, absolutely. And now there's research demonstrating that where they were taking karate practitioners, and they were putting them some on proteolytic enzymes and some on, and the ones that were, they would have recovery. If it would take 15 days for a hematoma, bruising or whatever. Right. They put them on the proteolytic enzymes and they'd be okay in 3 days or 4 days, or they were unfit for training for 2 weeks. Yeah. They put them on the enzymes. They were now fit within a few days. And so we were able to demonstrate how a high quality proteolytic enzyme is able to exert a systemic effect and improve recovery. And when I saw that research a long time ago, I said, well, what would happen if I started taking super physiological dosages of these enzymes? Mm-hmm. And going back to my story earlier of how did I get ready for national championships in 3.5 weeks? Well, I'll tell you how I did it. I took 100 enzymes every single day in combination with 50 proteolytic probiotics. And I was training 3 times a day. I was literally compressing a week's worth of training into 2 days. Yeah. In between, I was drinking prodigious amounts of water to get out the lactic acid of my body while jumping on a rebounder. So I would rebound 5 times a day, and I would train those 3 times. And I did that for 3.5 weeks. I literally took 12 weeks of training and compressed it in that time because I was sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber. Okay. I was doing an infrared sauna. Yeah. I was doing like every tool that I had in the book.
You were doing NASA astronaut training.
Yeah, because I wanted to see if I took everything that I knew, which I condensed in the Awesome Health course, and compressed it in this time where I know by conventional methodologies I can't recover. I'm not on steroids. I'm not on any of the items. I'm not eating meat proteins. I'm doing a radical experience. And a national championship, the evidence is there. There's now I wasn't trying to get to my first national champion. You have to realize I had already achieved that level, and we have to.
But it's still a very high level of competition, and it's a very high level of stress. And I think the point you're making is, if this didn't work at that level of competition, you couldn't have fudged the system. Right. You can't shortcut that. I mean, correct. You can't cheat it.
And that's what I needed to get past my own cognitive biases. Yeah. Because, your own bias is inherent in everything. And I said, here is something external to myself that I do not have control over that can demonstrate, am I at that caliber of athlete? And sure enough, I was. I kept that training on and was able to, instead of placing like 15th, come in 5th. Yeah. And so for me, I was able to recognize after 4 years of experimentation and thousands of people, I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm onto something here. Yeah. And now I feel really comfortable sharing that with the world because it's been tested and tried in our own experience. And that's how Matt and I develop a lot of things.
And that goes back to my statement earlier. The most effective marketing is telling the truth attractively. And there's no greater truth than the truth that you've experienced.
100%.
So Wade, we've covered a good amount of fascinating information on enzymes. It's been a really neat exploration of enzymes, and I'm really excited to make these products available to our listeners because, as I've said, I've had great results with them, and so have everybody I've shared them with has got back to me and said these things are really helpful. And we've been talking for a while now, but I would love to sort of hone in on some of the other products that you have, just so we can get an overview and maybe direct people to what they're for and what are some of the indicators that maybe they could benefit from them, so that by the time you and I finish this lovely dance, that they don't walk away sort of going, well, what was that for? Or how do I use it? Or what else does he have, So which of the lines would you talk? We kind of alluded to probiotics. You want to talk about the probiotics?
Yeah. So just to recap real quick. So first stage of digestion where support comes in is your enzymatic pathways. That's the primary part. Second part would be hydrochloric acid.
Right.
Third part would be your probiotics. And those are what I call the big three in the digestive component to optimize your health, vitality, and immune system function. So when you're dealing with the microbiome, which is a fancy name for the totality of all the good, the bad, and the uglies, as you like to say, inside there anywhere from 200 to 500 strains of probiotics in anybody's given digestive system. Yeah. Based on your dietary history, your background is going to determine. So, for example, with my business, I always come back to Matt and myself we're the co-founders of this company. He's on a ketogenic diet. I'm on a plant-based diet. And so how would those people benefit from probiotics? Because he'll have a different microbiome than I do based on that, as there's such a variance within the population. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in probiotics, and much of them are well researched, and usually they're researched independently.
Right.
And it takes a very sophisticated probiotic formulation to be able to use multi-strain probiotics where they're working synergistically together, because they need the right prebiotics so that they eat the right food. Because if they don't have the prebiotics with it, they're gonna die if they're a colonizing strain.
Yeah.
So probiotics come in two different forms. One are colonizers and one are transients. And I'll explain the difference for your listeners. A colonizing strain is something that takes hold in the intestinal tract, and providing the dietary conditions or your diet is supportive of that, they will grow in response.
Right.
And that can be both positive and negative. Candida being, say, a negative version of that versus, say, another bacteria. So when you're dealing with an individual, determining the colonizing strains that might be appropriate for that person is something that's left to an expert, where specifically that someone's taking care of your particular diet or your situation independently. With a transient strain, the advantage of them is they're not colonizers. In other words, they come into the system, do their job, and they're out in 3 days to a week.
Okay.
So
because that's just the lifespan of the organism.
Right. So when we looked at this years and years ago, we understood that was going to be an issue if you wanted to get something universally applicable. So we focused on a transient strain of probiotics. And what we did, we worked with the doctor that helped me overcome my own challenges. And what we did is we took a strain of L. plantarum, which is a very aggressive strain, put it in a toxic soup, ran a sine wave through the toxic soup to support and sustain some of these bacteria to survive.
You mean a form of electrical energy?
Correct.
Yeah.
And the survivors of that toxic soup, which would normally kill just about anything, take those survivors, then we grow them on different prebiotic mediums, and you create a super strain. And was able to create a patent around that.
You need a 5G strain.
Yeah, exactly. So that strain, which we call P3OM, and this is not me saying, this is the patent. So it's been proven in a scientific independent research to give you a patent that says it's antiviral, it's antiretroviral, it's proteolytic. It can be effective against tumors. It can be effective against viruses like the Rochester's virus, HIV, all these type of things, because a virus will attack the body through a protein coating. It activates on the cell, connects in, sends its signal in, takes over the center.
Right.
Pathogenic bacteria will oftentimes they'll feed on undigested proteins.
Yes.
And so what's beautiful about these intelligent forms of bacteria, this P3OM, is that it can identify pathogenic proteins, pathogenic bacteria, things that cause inflammation inside the body, and it'll go in and digest that. The other thing is it'll also transit through the body and pick up undigested proteins, which is one of the biggest sources of inflammatory responses inside the body. So what we are able to do is we can give people a concentrated doses of this L. plantarum hyper strain, the P3OM, and that'll come in, eat up all the undigested proteins, wipe out the pathogens, find out the pathogenic viruses and stuff, eat those up, render the proteins on the virus neutral so that you don't have any effect, and then boom, the the body clears itself up, and then that allows your colonizing strains to grow appropriately, especially if the person's following a diet that's suitable for their individual microbiome. And now today we've got all these microbiome tests that are coming. We're entering into what I feel is the golden age of probiotics, that people are able to get relatively accurate research on their own microbiome, what diet's going to support it, where the imbalances are, and because it's always changing. This is a very dynamic environment. So the L-Plantarum P3OM super strain here became a tool to help get a person back into balance faster.
Good.
And then hopefully that person is much easier to sustain the diet that's supportive of them. So if they have to get off sugar because they got high candida, you can add all these P3OMs, beat down the candida, get your body back, get on the proper dietary process, and you're going to get results much faster. The other thing is with this particular strain, I find it's most effective. I mean, you can take it with meals or that sort of thing, but what I really like to do is take it at nighttime before you go to bed.
Yeah.
And we just set them right by my dresser on the bed, and I take them before I go to bed, because that way they're going to work all night long while I'm asleep. And one of the great tests, practically, if you wake up in the morning, you have bad breath, brain fog, you're getting the little crusties in the eyes, that means you've got bad bacteria producing these byproducts.
Chemical byproducts.
Indole, skatol. If you have brain confusion, you can't concentrate, which is very common. That's a good indication that you have a disbalance inside the microbiome. They call it dysbiosis. Yeah. And so one of the most effective ways is to use the P3OM in a way to kind of beat that down while you're working on your dietary practice. And you're not going to get a disbalance, because if you take a colonizing strain and it's not the right strain for you, you can actually create a dysbiosis. And you see this happening a lot with maybe spore bacteria, and that's quite popular. Now, that's not to say that there isn't bacteria formulations that are good for colonizing strain. We just wanted to create something that was universally applicable to a variety of dietary practices and people, to kind of beat down the bad guys, let your good guys start to grow, and then move on without causing dysbiosis.
So if I'm understanding you right, you have colonizers and transients in there?
No, this is transients only.
Okay.
We are coming out, just so you know, we are coming out with a new product that's coming out this year. We worked on it. It's called Cognibiotics.
Okay.
It'll be out probably in the next few months.
Smart bugs?
Yeah. So basically we've combined a set of bacteria cultures with Chinese herbs so that we can actually manufacture the neurotransmitters inside your brain to get your brain and your mood turned back on, because so many people are suffering today. They can't make the neurotransmitters in there, serotonin, dopamine, all these type of things. And so we've taken a long time. We've been using this one for now a decade. These other ones have just cultivated recently.
So on the P3OM, if it's a transient, how would you know when you don't need to use it, or what's the protocol for knowing when you need it and how long to use it? And do you have a sort of a standard dose recommendation?
Yeah, so it depends on, obviously, the person's resources. It's not inexpensive, but it works. And so one of the things when people are really suffering from digestive challenges, we put them on a 90-day gut reset. You can pretty much recondition your entire microbiome in about 3 months. That means usually there needs to be some sort of dietary restriction, that you're on a diet that's supportive based on what your naturopathic doctor, your nutritionist, or whoever your expert is.
Or you could read the book How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy.
Exactly. By
Paul Chek.
Yeah, that's a great example. Well, that's leveraging an expert who understands these mechanisms. Same thing. And then, so 90 days is a great time. The more that you can take, the better. So when I did it, when I was reconditioning my own system, I took 35 enzymes a day.
Okay, yeah.
And then I would take 20 of the probiotics. I took 10 in the morning, first thing in the morning, and I took 10 at night.
Yeah.
Matt, who eats a lot, obviously he's a meat eater and stuff, he would oftentimes take the enzymes with the probiotics with his meals, because he's getting a lot more protein content. And the P3OM stands for powerful proteolytic probiotic. It actually breaks down proteins.
Oh.
So if for whatever reason you've got undigested proteins inside your intestinal tract,
It'll help break it down.
It'll help break that down so that you're not adding to it on your dietary practice.
So it probably helped people with gas then.
It's huge.
And you know, I was testing some probiotics from another doctor who I'm going to be interviewing, and I noticed that it really made my bowel movements quite full. Mm-hmm. But with these, I was only using 2. I was just sort of saying, well, I'll just try 2 because I don't normally take more than 2. And I didn't really notice that I had that fullness. I didn't feel anything negative. I felt fine. It might have been doing its magic, but I noticed that it didn't have the same effect, but maybe I just am not taking enough.
Yeah, generally that's the case. And one of the little hacks for people who want to, particularly if they've got things like herpes, or they've got some sort of bacteria overgrowth, or they're having a lot of inflammatory, like they're getting runny noses or that type of things, what I suggest for them to do is to mix some coconut water and some coconut meat, blend it all together. You can add a little honey into it.
To feed it.
And then mix your bacteria. And we actually put videos out on the BioOptimizer site on how to do that. And you can mix it up. The higher the temperature that you ferment it in, the faster it'll ferment. So temperature will affect enzymatic activity or bacteria energy, and that's why you get a fever, for example, if you're sick, because it wants to, every degree you go up, you speed up the
immune system.
Yeah, and you speed up the enzymatic response, you speed up the activity of the bacteria to a certain point, and then eventually get past 114, I guess you start killing things off. That's why enzymatic activity. So they work synergistically together. So generally, the rule of thumb is 2.5 enzymes to every 1 probiotic that you take. So
with the
you can go 2 to 1 or 2.5 to 1. So if you took 5 enzymes, 2 P3OM, they'll work in conjunction with each other.
So now I've looked at research showing that typically about 10% of probiotic strains eaten, if you take it anywhere near food, only about 10% of it can get past the hydrochloric acid without being annihilated.
Yep.
That's interesting. You say they break down proteins, but do you have any idea how much of a decrease in performance you're getting if you're eating it with food versus taking it on an empty stomach due to the hydrochloric acid complication?
I don't have the specifics on that. But what I found is some people, for example, Matt, who has a lot more protein in his diet and a higher fat diet, he really likes it in conjunction. He says he feels much cleaner when he does it. I'm a plant-based guy. I don't notice a difference either way.
Okay.
So I just like to take them at night or in the morning. If I feel, let's say I've been traveling a lot and I feel like I'm catching something, then I'll
jack it up.
I'll just take a handful.
Okay.
And also, here's another great hack: food poisoning.
Yes, yeah.
So food poisoning is quite common. Almost everybody's gone to a resort somewhere and got food poisoning or on a trip.
Third world country.
Across the board, we've had dozens and dozens of friends and people in our things that had food poisoning. And I'd say, look, if you got food poisoning, just take a handful of them. Just dump them out and eat them. I've had people on the floor ready to go to the hospital. 30 minutes later, they're fine.
That's excellent. And then because they're transient, is there any problem with just using them prophylactically continuously?
No, I have been on them continuously for the last 15 years.
Will they help me digest my popcorn tonight?
We can always give it a shot.
Okay. Okay.
We both share a passion for popcorn. We just found that out a minute ago. Exactly, so that's great. Yeah. So this is kind of what I say is an all-purpose continuous use product. You can go off it. You can go back on it.
Yeah.
Most people, what they find though, is once they've gone through that, what I suggest is do 90 days of a high dosage and then titrate down. Okay. So for at nights, for example, I only take 4 at a time. I take 4 every night, and that's it.
I'm going to start exploring that and testing it because I'm very interested in that. You know, I feel quite good, and you know, I'm a healthy guy, so a lot of these things that I test, I don't really notice much. As I said, I did notice changes with the enzymes, And I was really impressed because Wellbeing's supposed to be one of the most potent proteolytic enzymes and enzyme formulas out there. And I thought, damn, because I've been using them for years, not realizing that some of the symptoms I thought were coming from food were actually coming from the pork in there.
That's one of the challenges, and that's a great product. And one of the challenges of people that have issues with animal-based products can run into contraindications with any enzyme that's been derived from an animal source. The other thing about an animal source is it only works in a very narrow pH range.
Right.
These will work from 2 to 12.
See, I didn't even, because I've been in this industry for so long and so kind of just assumed that they wouldn't put animal products in there because I thought it was an enzyme product. So I never even bothered to read the label. I just, Wellbeing, I read research studies on them, but I never actually focused on what is what's in each ingredient in there. I really just in my mind thought I'm just taking enzymes. But when you told me, I think they have ox bile, and it triggered me to go look. And so it had pork, and I'm like, oh my God. And pork just messes me up. That was the first meat I had to let go of after I found out I had a genetic allergy to beef, and that changed my life. Boy, I used to have headaches every day and felt like someone had a hat that was 10 times too tight on my head. And as soon as I got the beef and the dairy out of there, I never had a headache after that, unless it was something I created from, exertion from lifting weights or being up in altitude or something. But the point I'm getting to is when I switched to your MassZymes, I felt fantastic. I didn't feel like I'd missed a beat. And I'm like, wow, these things are as effective in my body as the Wellbeing were, and they might even be better. I just don't have a way to measure it. But I'll tell you what, they're more cost effective. Wellbeing are damn expensive. I get the ones from Europe that are stronger than the other. I think my 2 bottles that I get are like $180 a piece.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't know, 300 count, but that's a lot of money. Every time I gotta buy enzymes, the girls look at me like, wow, you went through those already. I'm like, yes, But so to be able to find something that's that effective, that's more cost effective, that doesn't have animal stuff in it, is impressive. So I give you the tip of the hat for that one. And I'm excited to test I've been using them, but I think talking to you has helped me say, okay, I'm going to start exploring, be a little more adventurous with them.
Yeah, and when you combine the higher dosage of the MassZymes, you'll notice a difference in your recovery, how quickly you recover. And as we age, we certainly can really pick up on those nuances, and
I can tell you all about them.
And so for me, that was one of my great secrets that allowed me to probably extract more amino acids out of the food that I was eating and be able to recover much faster without you resorting to, steroids and those type of things, which some of my competitors were using at the time.
I have a question for you. For people like me, I don't travel as much anymore, but I used to live on airplanes. What's the effect on those products of going through the radiation if they're in your suitcase?
You know what? Remarkably, they'll survive it. And a great test is you can take a bowl of oatmeal or something after you've traveled through it, crack open the capsules, and stir it up.
Okay.
And it should start digesting that bowl of oatmeal relatively quickly. So, for example, 3 caps of MassZymes will digest a bowl of oatmeal in about 2 minutes. It'll just be liquid.
Neat.
Yeah, and if you go on the website, you'll actually see where we use the P3OM. We put a piece of steak in vinegar, and we use time-lapse photography, and you'll actually see the steak digest with the MassZymes, and then if you see the MassZymes and the P3OM working in conjunction, it just turns it into powder.
And how does the vinegar fit in there?
Well, the vinegar was a close approximation of what would happen if you had HCl.
I see.
Now, in your body, that's going to be accelerated by a fold of 10 to 20 times in time-lapse photography because temperature plus the environment, peristaltic contraction, and then also going back, there's going to be the variance of pH as the digestive process goes through. So what we were able to create just for an illustrative, demonstrative purpose is going to be far superior inside the system where they're designed to work inside your body. So.
And how about infants and children for these products?
Yeah, so with infants and children, what we use is 1 capsule for every 40 pounds of body weight.
okay, so like my littlest one's 15 pounds, and she's a bit gassy. So I think it's normal for kids because they're just establishing their
Yep.
flora.
Yep.
So if I put what?
Are they breastfeeding?
Oh yeah.
So what a lot of our women who are breastfeeding, what they'll do is they'll take a little bit of the
on the
P through
nipple.
M and put it on the nipple.
Yeah.
So you can, put a little powder with it, or just put it on there, wet it, or,
Yeah,
and then that's a natural way for them to get what they want. And children are pretty in tune actually with and if it's right for them, they'll just clamp on and go for it. So.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna have Angie try that. Zoe gets pretty gassy, and I think it's normal for kids because like they're establishing their microbiome. But of the 3 children that I've had, she definitely gets quite gassy. I mean, she passes some gas. You'd think there was a logger sitting in the room. I'm like, oh, that came out of that tiny body. That's pretty impressive. So Angie has been using probiotics on her nipples and things like that, but I'm curious to test that particular.
Yeah, try it out.
I want to see what yours does for her. So those are great. Any other comments before we move to the next products?
Yeah, I think if people want to know more about it or specifics and programs, they can check out some of the links that's on the site. And I got some kind of expanded hacks or things to do or in what to do, and without going too much into recommendations. So it's people can explore themselves. And I think
it's not like you're going to hurt yourself.
No, that's the beauty of for example, enzymes, of course, as most people will know, or probiotics, is there's breaking the GI barrier, which was, back in orthomolecular nutrition with Linus Pauling and Hawkins and Hoffer and all those guys, when they were doing that, is one of the ways to experiment with super physiological dosages of anything is you take it till you get the run. So you break the GI barrier, you're at your tolerance. And they started that with vitamin C and other nutrients. And then you titrate down as soon as you get the runs again. Yeah. Well, I've experimented with MassZymes, for example, and I topped out at 1,000 capsules in a day.
That's a shitload of enzymes.
Because I wanted to see what point I'd break GI barrier.
I'm surprised you didn't go into spontaneous combustion and become a new star.
Well, maybe that happens at 2,000. I haven't tried that. But obviously, you have to own the company to do that.
Yes, yeah, a rich daddy.
Yeah, but what was interesting is never broke the GI barrier.
Really?
And so what's interesting, and Howell talked about that in some of his work, that he said that you do not break the GI barrier with enzymes, that your body will absorb and utilize those and reuse them. And that's a phenomenal piece, because it's a piece that I think should have been added into our nutrition profile, because a lot of people will ask the question, well, if I'm taking these enzymes or I'm taking these probiotics all the time, is there a point that I need to stop? Does my body stop producing its own enzymes? And I was like, no, your body will always produce a certain amount of enzyme. Let's call it 100 units for just illustrative purposes. If you're able to produce 100 units, okay, well, we've had the turkey dinner syndrome. You had the turkey dinner and at the holidays, and you had the second helping, and then grandma breaks out the pie, and then what happens?
Bogged down.
Everybody's making the dash for the couch, the floor, and
comatose.
People are passing out. And you think, well, here I've put all this energy units, all these building blocks in there. Shouldn't I be able to go out and lift for 2 hours or go run a marathon or whatever? And you can't. And that's because your body then shunts all of its enzymatic capacity that's running all these other components
into the food.
And so I looked at fasting. So if you look at fasting, every species that gets hurt will start fasting or sick. It stops eating. Why? Well, it frees up their enzymatic capacity to start healing the body. So I went, well, what would happen if I started using high dosages of enzymes and probiotics while I was fasting? Could I accelerate the results? And the results have been extremely promising. So, and that's all anecdotal. We haven't put that into research so people can try it. So people who do fasting or regular fasting, when you do the enzymes and probiotics in combination with it, you generally accelerate through the benefits much faster.
I've got a question I bet you've never been asked before.
Sure.
Would those enzymes enhance one's ability to handle things like ayahuasca or metabolize magic mushrooms and things like that.
I'll tell you a great story.
I want to hear it.
So I was doing the toad medicine.
Yeah.
You know, where they do the things on your shoulder.
Yeah.
And I was in Indonesia with a master of the craft, and he started doing the dots on me. And as he would do the dots, so I've been doing this stuff for a long time, I would feel, because it's kind of like a poison coming into the system. It comes in, and I can literally feel my immune system coming up to meet it. And so then he'd do a couple more dots, and I was like, after a little while, he's like, Wade, you're not getting sick. I haven't experienced this before. And I said, well, that's because of I've got all these got all these extra enzymes and stuff going on in the body.
Yeah.
And he said, well, are you going to vomit or anything? I said, well, would you like me to? And he goes, well, he's kind of unnerved because he's giving me all these shots and nothing.
You're just jacking up.
I could feel it come up and then not. And I said, okay, well, I'll let it out. So when it came up, I suppressed my immune system front. No, that might sound crazy for people, but I was able to do it. I vomited a little bit, and I felt this pain in my heart. So it was probably an emotional wound. I felt it come up, and I said, yes, Spirit, let that out. And I quickly purged. And then I was completely clear. And he says, would you like another dose? And I said, you can give me as many doses as you want.
Yeah. Because most people will vomit and shit at the same time on that stuff.
And I said, you can give me as many doses as you want now. Nothing's coming out, I can tell you. And when I've done other plant medicines, I don't seem to suffer the negative side effects of, I can take pretty large dosages of some of these things and be completely fine.
It's interesting, too, because...
And I tend to have very beatific experiences. It seems my body's ability to metabolize and utilize the healing components inside that is accelerated without any of the. And I do believe that there's been a reduction of overall toxins inside my body over time. So you're taking me 15 years into this of taking super physiological dosages. So that gives me certain capacity that maybe other people don't have. So
one of the things that I found through experience. So I'm. And it sort of is a little bit countercurrent to some of the things you're saying, which I want to share with you because I just want to share my observation. Using digestive enzymes, my naturopathic books and resources that I've studied say that when a person's low on digestive enzymes, you start by taking one capsule, and if it doesn't give you enough digestive support, you keep going up until you feel comfortable, like you're getting the digestion is effective. But then they say because the body is recovering its own enzyme production, as the body heals, it will start producing more enzymes, and all of a sudden you can actually start having the same symptoms that you had to begin with, because now the combination of the incoming exogenous enzymes with the internal endogenous enzymes can actually start digesting the stomach wall and causes inflammation. So they say if you've had good digestion due to the use of the supplementation of enzymes, but all of a sudden you start having symptoms again, it usually means your body's enzyme systems are kicking in, and you should start reducing the enzymes until you stay comfortable or you don't need them anymore. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this happen over and over again. I've even had it happen with myself. The difference, though, is that we're not using your enzymes. So that, there's a lot of difference in these enzymes out there.
Yep.
So what you're describing, though, doesn't really fit that story.
Yeah, I kind of come at the story from the opposite angle, and that is we go to what we've found is an effective dosage for a lot of people, and then we titrate down. Mm-hmm. So we get to the same conclusion. They're starting regulating up.
Yes. Yeah.
Me being an extreme guy, we get the response, and then over time you taper off. Yeah. So typically after that 90-day period, which is usually, because most people that are coming to me people have to recognize is they already have compromised digestion. That's why they're showing up here.
There's not many people that don't. I think part of the difference too is that, I've been studying this type of material for a long time, and a lot of the digestive enzyme formulations have hydrochloric acid in them. Yeah. They're not, yours does not have hydrochloric acid in it.
Correct.
You do have HCl as a side product.
Yep.
So if you just say, I'm going to go right up and do 6 of these things, you can actually irritate the hell out of the stomach if you got hydrochloric acid at too high a dose.
Correct.
So I think that might be the difference here.
HCl is definitely something that is going to be probably the widest variance that I've experienced, and that's one of the reasons why we've kept HCl out of the enzyme formulation, because those 3 areas are independent: the enzyme factor, the hydrochloric acid factor, and the probiotic factor. Oftentimes, there's a synergy between the 3. If you got one compromised, they're all compromised. But sometimes, for some people, it's only one of those areas.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do at BioOptimizers, if someone takes a product of ours, and let's say they took the probiotic and they didn't seem to get the result that they were hoping for, they reach out to us, contact us, and we find out, well, actually, they've got low stomach acid. So we'll actually send them a bottle of the HCl and say, look, just on us, try this and see if that corrects the issue.
Right.
9 times out of 10, it does.
Good.
And so one of the things we believe in is, or we call it, we'll fix your digestion guarantee.
Yeah.
If we can't fix it through one of these mediums or some of our ancillary products, because there might be specifics like gluten or a lipase deficiency or something, then we'll suggest a specific one. But those are the 3 standards to get people going.
This simple test that I give and teach my students is, if you're having digestive trouble and you're not sure if you need enzymes, squeeze a lemon into a cup and drink 1/3 of it at the beginning of the meal, 1/3 in the middle of the meal, 1/3 at the end of the meal. And if you notice any improvement at all, it's an indication you need digestive enzymes. And I've found that to be very consistently
reliable.
a
great one. That's a great one.
There's a lot of enzymes in a good, healthy lemon.
That's true.
It'll take the enamel off your teeth.
Yes. And then another thing for hydrochloric acid, they can take a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and mix it with 4 ounces of water. Mix it up, drink the concoction. If they don't burp within 5 minutes, they've got low HCl.
Right, because it's neutralizing the HCl. Okay, cool. Wow.
So a couple little tests.
Tricks.
The lemon test is a great one. I'll start suggesting that.
That's an old ancient, folk remedy, but some of these folks had their shit together.
Well, like you said earlier, that when you're out there without any help, you start figuring things out.
Yeah.
There's no store, there's no internet, there's no Amazon, you can't just go www fix my problem. You had to figure it out.
Well, as it says in the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. And people always say, what does that mean? I say, the people closest to the earth that aren't trapped in all their silliness, that understand how nature really works, because they're the only ones that'll be able to survive when the shit hits the fan, because everybody else doesn't know where to find water or what food really is. They'll be standing at the supermarket all crying their eyes out because there's nothing in there except a battle going on. Point being is, the people closest to the earth, what were called peasants, actually had deep, deep wisdom. But academia, denies that and says, these native cultures were stupid. They didn't know anything. And I'm like, oh, yeah? What? See that pyramid over there? Why don't you tell me how that got built if ancient people were stupid?
Yeah, really.
Not to mention all the other technologies that they had, such as being able to navigate the seas for thousands of miles with no fancy technology except looking at the stars. So anyhow, fascinating. You got a couple more products there?
Yeah. So one of our more popular products we came out with recently, which is Capex.
Right.
This is an enzyme blend that keeps the protease, the 3, the 4, and the 4.5 and the 6.0. But it also contains 4 different types of lipase. So a lot of people who are using a higher fat diet or having trouble with a ketogenic diet or maybe a more higher fat component, some people are responding well to those diets. This is great for optimizing ketogenesis. And inside of that one, we've added L-carnitine. We've also added a little bit. This one we do have some HCl in. That's why you only take a little bit. Dandelion root to stimulate the bile. Plus, it's got 7-keto DHEA, which improves mitochondrial. It upregulates mitochondrial. So you get about a 20% boost. So that's why this one you would only take in the morning or in the afternoon, like you're saying. You're doing 2 and 2. I do 4 of these first thing in the morning, and that's my energy boost for the day. I'm not, I don't drink too much coffee or anything like that. I like this one. It's not a stimulant like a nervous system stimulant. You're doing strictly with mitochondria. The design is to break down the fats, to transport the fats into the cell, and then to speed up the cell mitochondrial function so that you get that sustained kick.
So it's actually stimulating the biochemical pathways as opposed to multiplying the mitochondria.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That's that one. For people who are struggling with gluten intolerance, we have Gluten Guardian.
And I like that. I've tested that. I personally have found very few people that are gluten intolerant actually do well with gluten-free products.
Correct.
I've found that very consistently. A lot of people get upset at me and say, well, look at your diet log, look at your symptoms. A lot of those are the same symptoms you have with gluten. They might be a little bit lower level. But my point is, on my birthday, Angie's mother makes these badass chocolate brownies out of gluten-free stuff. And it's flours that are usually less irritating for me, like rice flour just drives my body crazy, but things like potato flour and some of the other ones. And chocolate my body doesn't do well with either. But anyhow, I took your gluten guard, and I noticed it definitely knocked the symptoms I normally get down. And so the side effect was I ate 3 brownies instead of 1.
Yeah, that's the dark side of gluten guarding.
That's the dark side.
But I'll explain to people who understand that. So gluten is like, if you've ever seen a baseball the cover's been torn off. Mm-hmm. Gluten is like the leather coating on the outside, and that's what your body can't break down.
Right.
And so inside is the nutrients inside of that, which is the threads.
Yeah.
And so what Gluten Guardian is, it contains dipeptidyl peptidase 4. It's a fancy name. It's called DPP4. And that is an enzyme that actually breaks down that coating like on the baseball so that you can actually access what's inside of it. And so that inflammatory response is your body can't break down that. And some people are more genetically predisposed to have that. And so this is a great thing, especially for people who are concerned going to social occasions or restaurants where there's potential cross-contamination.
Right, yeah.
You take, 3 capsules, 4 capsules. 3 to 5 is usually the effective dosage. It's going to range by how intolerant to gluten you are. There's a kind of a range. Some people they smell it and they have a reaction. Other people can have a little bit, or some people just feel a little full if they have a bowl of spaghetti or something. Well, that they can kind of find their dosage just to go into those environments. Then from there, we just got a couple other products. ConstaCleanse. This is an herbal laxative product. It does have Cascara Sangrada in it, which is very strong. This is only used if you're really bound up. Let's say you've been traveling.
Temporarily,
It's a temporary stuff, not something that you use regularly, but it's to get things moving.
Yeah.
So, and then the idea is you use that to get things moving. And then ultimately, hopefully, you're making adjustments in your dietary practice. So
or
that
hydration is what it often is.
Oftentimes. And then we have another one, Parasite Cleanse, which is a combination of herbs that have been effective against tapeworm, ringworm, things like that. So, got a black walnut and golden seal and a bunch of other herbs. Again, if you're suffering from a parasitical infection of some sort, then that can be an effective, again, short term. So that's our primary suite of digestive related products. And we've been it's just a great mission to be sharing these with people on your podcast.
Yeah, no, I dig it.
It's really awesome.
I'm very careful because I feel a responsibility to people. And, when I teach my students, I don't want to teach them things that I don't have a lot of confidence in. When I share products, I don't share products that I haven't tested myself enough times to really say this works, or have and then I test it with other people. Because for me, what's more important than money is feeling good about what I'm sharing and knowing that I'm really doing my best to help people. Because if you can make, as people make truckloads of money selling all sorts of crap. But as I said to you before we're on the podcast, I have to sleep with me at night. And if I can't really cuddle up to myself because I've got to repress all the bullshit and all the lies and all the stories I'm using to make money, but meanwhile, the rest of me, when you evolve spiritually, you come to realize that the ego is really a great illusion. And the truth is everybody is a part of you, just like cells in an organism. And all of us as human beings are one being inhabiting the earth. And so, when I listened to your interview with Dave Asprey, and then I heard the depth of knowledge you and your partner had, and I could hear the logic in it, and I know enough about these subjects that I could follow the conversation quite closely and say, okay, that makes sense. The first reaction was, okay, these guys are not bullshit artists. They're not, scamming people. They're telling things that could be evaluated. I could go look into the research myself and check on this, but the truth is always going to just be test the product. And then you were kind enough to send me a nice package to really work with. And so I think I've had them, a month and a half, or I don't know, since before CanPit Pro, you had them to me. So,
Yep.
And in that time, I gave them out to clients and had clients buy them. And this is from, professional athletes to, business executives to whatever. And I got nothing but consistently good feedback. So I was very, very excited to share, and I feel very good about sharing these with you. And I think Penny will be putting on the promotional offer that we have.
Yeah, they'll be, I think it's at biooptimizers.com/4DL. They'll put in the code there, and they'll get a 10% discount on
Great.
any of the products. Of course, everything comes with a 365-day money-back guarantee. If you try the product, don't like it, we just give you your money back, or we'll replace it with a product that might be more appropriate if you contact our customer service. And we have a great customer service inside that. When you reach out by email or by the Facebook or by phone, what medium you like to contact in, those questions come into our staff, which are well trained. And any question that hasn't been answered, I've answered virtually all of those questions.
Wow, yeah.
And they've trained them to answer, because there's a lot of common ones. But anytime there's an unusual one,
it goes to
that's
you.
filtered directly to me, and I'll either respond to that directly to the person, or sometimes, in some cases, I'll recognize that our products aren't the right thing for that person, and I'll say, hey, you know what? You don't need my products. You need this type of practitioner.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Go get a professional in your right. And I always say that these aren't a replacement for a bad diet or a bad lifestyle. They're not a replacement for a professional expert to give you guidance on your specifics, such as yourself.
Evaluation,
a skilled evaluation. But if you're struggling with some digestive issues, and most people are, this could be the right answer for you, and we'd love to hear your feedback from it. And we take all the risk away.
I love it. I think what you're doing is fantastic. And, I've had a fantastic time talking to you about this. I've picked up some great tips. And as fun as this is, I got to have another podcast with you, because I really want to get into your experience with and views on spiritual development and, getting out of the head and into the heart, and, getting to the things that really are meaningful, like what are our values and what are the things that we can grow into, and how do we realize the unity with nature and with each other, and get past some of these superficial differences. And I know you have, because you and I have had some good conversations on that, and I just enjoy exploring this with people that have devoted a lot of their life to it, like you have, and I think we could have a real fun spiritual nutrition conversation.
I'd love that, because as we discussed earlier, that is kind of the foundation of both of our lives.
Yes.
We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And much of what I do in the world, actually all of what I do in the world to the best of my ability, is a Dharma principle, as I believe I've been put on this planet for a specific reason, and it's my job to go out there and do the best. And it just so happened that my own challenges in physiological, performance and that sort of stuff led me to this.
They were your internship.
Yeah, and so from that knowledge, I was like, okay, well, I just share what I was able to solve and fix, and if there's other people out there that can benefit from. But if that changes some point in time, it'll change because of what Spirit tells me.
Yes.
And I have that confidence that I think a lot of people today are seeking, and to dive deeper into that gives a richness and meaning meaning to virtually everything. Whether it's reading a book, whether it's interacting with the checkout clerk in the store, whether it's, us hanging out here, or whether I'm sitting on a rock somewhere in the hills with nobody around meditating and being dialed in, is connecting with the greater humanity and the greater spirit of all that is. It adds an awesome. It's awesome. It is. We are living in this most fantastic age ever. We were talking about this. And I'd love to dive into you on that thing, because to me, that's the core essence of what we're here on the planet for, is to find our truth inside ourselves and to resonate and share that with ourselves and our family and the world at large.
The other thing too that we can get into is that most of the people's diet and health problems are because of the choices they're making, consciously or unconsciously. And choices are actions that are the products of beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you really realize that almost all health problems, especially chronic health problems, boil down to belief systems that are unconscious, and that comes largely from conditioned beliefs that largely come from religious ideologies, versus having a spiritual life, which is not bound by dogma. Mm-hmm. It's really heart-centered. I think we can really also tie all our conversations together today with how do we begin to live a more spiritual life and look honestly at the beliefs that are leading to the behaviors that are leading to diet problems and body problems and emotional problems. Because, it's like you look at the research on the microbiome today, and it makes it very, very clear that a lot of depression and anxiety and emotional stuff can be coming right from your gut biome. Yes, so you can take a bunch of fancy probiotics, but you're not changing the beliefs and the behaviors. So really what you're doing is kind of like being a shitty driver that keeps crashing their car and replacing fenders instead of getting driver's education.
Correct.
So I'd like to get into the spiritual driver's education when we get together next. And what I'll try to remember to do is have a big bowl of popcorn and some good smoke for you.
All right, I'm in.
All right, buddy. Hey, I got to tell you, man, I love you. You're amazing.
The feeling is mutual.
Yeah. Hey.
Thanks, brother.
Many blessings.
Thank you.
And let's do lots of these things together. And I look forward to meeting your partner and your company. And I'm going to keep testing your products and letting them teach me. And I'll pester you with questions now and then, and I hope you guys all really enjoy these products. I'm super excited to share them and to share Wade with you, and his last name is exactly what it should be, Lightheart, and thank you for having such a light and open heart.
Thank you.
Oh, great spirit. Enjoy, everybody.